right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a joint City Council and Planning Commission meeting. I really want to thank Bob Taylor and the community and the Sonoma Valley Community Communication for putting this on. I really appreciate all the work that KSVY does to make this work. So appreciation to them. Thank you, Bob. You're a hero. And you have great purple pants. I also want to thank the Vintage House for hosting this. We couldn't do it in our regular chambers just because it's too large. So I appreciate it. I want to welcome, of course, my council colleagues. We've got, for those who don't know us, we have Vice Mayor Rachel Hunley, Madeline Agramonte, and Amy Harrington. David Cook had a prior engagement, was not able to be with us tonight. And we also have a planning commission tonight, which is really kind of nice to spend some time with all of you. We've got Chair Bob Felder here, Vice Chair Ron Wellender, and then going down the line, Commissioners Larry Barnett, Sheila O'Neill, Jim Bohar, Kelso Barnett, and of course, Steve Barbos. So we're all happy to be here, excited for the meeting today. And of course, we have our city staff, Kathy Capriola, our city manager, David Storr, our planning director. What do you do? Planning director. He'll be leading through a lot of this meeting, and then our city attorney, Jeff Walter. So we're going to start with the pledge, as we always do. So we're going to pledge allegiance to the flag. If Jack Ding would like to lead us in the pledge, that would be good. Ready? Fantastic. Okay, great. So we're going to go on and go for public comment right now. So this will just be for items not on the agenda. So at this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Under state law, and unless otherwise permitted under the Ralph M. Brown Act, the merits of this matter presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by City Council at this time. For items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Upon being acknowledged by the mayor, please step to the podium, speak into the microphone, and begin by stating and spelling your name. Do we have anybody for general public comment? Walk over here to David Storr. He's got a microphone.
I'm the Reverend Norm Cram, C-R-A-M, like studying for an exam. My address is 215 Napa Street East. Here's a draft of a letter I submitted to the Sonoma Index Tribune. The half-cent county-wide sales tax, Measure G, to aid county fire efforts is a regressive tax defined as a tax applied uniformly, thereby making a larger percentage of income from low-income earners instead of from high-income earners. I believe taking money for property protection from low-income earners is unethical. Already, nearly a third of our neighbors in Sonoma County, mostly hard-working wage earners, live below the poverty line. Measure G makes their poverty worse. As a clergy member who happens to be blessed with property, I urge our county supervisors, if they dubiously prioritize fire efforts over homelessness and mental health needs, to revise the measure to raise property taxes from property owners like myself instead of from low-income earners. Vote no on Measure G.
Thank you very much. Anybody else for public comment?
Good evening, everyone. Lynn Marie DeVincent, Sonoma. So some of you know that last week the planning commissioners approved 3 cell towers for our little town, but just 4G, not 5G. But when they asked Verizon to agree to a condition that if they returned with the much more toxic 5G equipment, that perhaps they would submit new applications, Verizon said, we'll think about it. So get your shielding in place, folks. We are about to be we're about to be irradiated, whether we like it or not. And by the way, 4G cell towers spewing invisible radiation in your direction isn't good either. A new tower is going into the Best Western, spewing this invisible radiation 1,500 feet to all the businesses in the Whole Foods shopping center, all the people walking by, all the employees at Best Western who are there, a lot more than the owner, who reportedly told Verizon he thought the new towers were a good idea. But Lynn Marie, we're in a national security race with China. We sure have. We sure are. They have to get 5G. We have to get 5G in place because they're way ahead of us. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. So have you heard about what's happening in Wuhan? The epidemic? Guess what else happened in Wuhan in the early 2019? China Mobile built a 5G smart highway project, the first in the country. 2,000 5G base stations. And this information I got from Road Traffic Technology News in China. I read a more recent article that there are actually 10,000 stations now. This book is a required reading if you want to understand what's happening with the electromagnetic frequencies. The Invisible Rainbow, A History of Electricity and Life by Arthur Furstenberg. In chapter 9, he talks about the 6 times in history that pandemics broke out in relation to disruptions in the Earth's electromagnetic environment. Now, January 2020, the Wuhan epidemic after 10,000 5G base stations were turned on. We have a lot to worry about, UGBs, affordable housing, climate change, but electromagnetic radiation is an environmental pollutant. I'll be submitting an appeal to the City Council so that you all can kick Verizon out of Sonoma. Let's remember, we're the Sonoma Bear Flag revolutionists, right? Have courage, council members, neighbors, parents. Let's make history again. Let's stop the cell towers before they do us harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn Marie. Anybody else for public comment? Back to the meeting. Okay, so the purpose of this meeting, we've got a study session between obviously the Planning Commission and our City Council. We've got a variety of important initiatives that are coming before us. We have a lot of new state laws that are dealing directly with development code and our housing structure, kind of changing the way that the city is able to regulate how housing gets built. We have to change a lot of subjective standards into objective standards. We have a general plan update that's coming along shortly, and we want to kind of begin a discussion around that. Development code updates. There's this question of whether or not we should focus on the development code first or move directly into a general plan update. And then we also have just kind of general updates on our housing element and the arena numbers that we're going to be receiving in the next little bit here. And then we're going to kind of focus this discussion specifically on the development code. So we want to hear directly from commissioners and from council on what parts of the development code should be prioritized. If they have questions, kind of following David Store's presentation, and a variety of other things regarding that. And then we also want to work in with the urban growth boundary. We have a little bit of a draft item here that has some changes to some of the language in the previous UGB measure. Everybody has a sheet with that kind of describes and highlights those changes that they can reference. But one thing I think it's really important, we have 11 of us here today. And so while I've been accused and been guilty of kind of going over time, I think all of us should try to be respectful to make sure that we all make sure that we can hear from everybody. So during the question period, I'm going to ask that everybody kind of stay focused on asking questions. And during the comment section, obviously go for that there. We're going to have a timer during the time. So I'm looking for 4 minutes of comments, and then we'll move on to the next one. I'm fine if people want to go for a second bite of the apple, but we want to make sure that we hear from everybody. I'm hoping that we can kind of keep that limited a little bit. And if you hear somebody say something already, let's try not to repeat it. If you need to emphasize, that's okay. But that's kind of what I'm looking for tonight. Try to keep things together and keep things moving along so that we can hear from everybody and have a successful, productive meeting. So we're going to have two parts of the meeting. Our first part, we're going to be focusing on housing legislation, general plan, development code, housing element, and RENA. We're going to have a staff presentation, questions and answers from the Planning Commission, and we've got public comment on that. Who thinks that they're going to be commenting on the first item? The development code. You don't know? Okay. And then the next part, we'll have a little discussion after that, and then we'll be going into UGB. Who's here to comment on UGB? Okay, so not too bad. All right, good. Well, I don't think we necessarily need to do a 2-minute limit. We can probably keep it at 3. All right, great. So let's go ahead. I'll turn it over to David Storer, and we'll get moving. Okay.
Mayor, council members, Chair Felder, and commissioners. I have a brief presentation for you tonight, most of which is taken from your staff packet for the benefit of the audience tonight and the public. We put a few slides together. And first of all, I want to talk a little bit about how busy a year it's been this last year, and my projection that it's going to be probably twice as busy this next coming year, or the year in which we're in, 2020. First of all, I want to talk a little bit briefly to set the stage, perhaps. Our governor has asked the state of California, the building industry, if you will, to produce 3.5 million units by 2025, which really equates to almost 500,000 a year. And production-wise, that's never happened, not even close. So that sets the framework, perhaps, for what the legislature was doing last year. Almost 900, I believe, bills that were presented to the legislature, of which these right here, this almost a dozen, talk about how land use is to be governed in the state. Basically, most cities and counties have basically said that this is really a lack of local control being taken away by the legislature. I've highlighted in yellow those that we've talked about before at the city council and public meetings, and we'll be talking about some of these at the Planning Commission. We've begun that process already. With particular attention, I'd like to point out SB 330. Before I do that, some of those that were in yellow are relating to accessory dwelling units. The City Council adopted an urgency ordinance to deal with that before the end of the year, and the Planning Commission has begun its review. We had our first meeting on that earlier this month. SB 330 is probably the most impactful piece of legislation that I've seen in my 30 years as a professional. And this is where the state of California has said to local agencies that we're creating a preliminary application for projects, for land use projects, which is very akin to what's called the Permit Streamlining Act. If, for example, you submit an application and you don't deem it complete, it's already deemed complete by defact, and there's certain mechanisms in place that give automatic approvals if you don't act within certain timelines. This SB 330 does the same thing for residential projects, and we have created our own preliminary application and placed it on our website consistent with the law. We've added to what SB 330 legislates to make it clearer for developers. The greatest concern that I have as a professional, and a lot of planners throughout the state is the ambiguity with respect to what constitutes a hearing. It limits to 5 the types of meetings, and this even includes staff or departmental meetings as well, I've just found out today, at least if you take the most strict terminology of it, which is kind of interesting to me. We have as a city a tree committee, design review and historic preservation commission, planning commission, and then appeals. As I placed here on the overhead, the hearing is any meeting that's conducted by the city and can include workshops or study sessions and continued meetings. So we're limited somewhat to trying to figure out what 5 means when it comes to the hearings. With the work that staff has done, as I said, we've already created the preliminary application that is on our website. And as a staff, we've also begun the process of trying to review our development code and look at those standards, those that are objective and those that are subjective, because SB 330 basically says that we're not allowed to review a project and apply subjective standards that we have. And for the most part, those equate to the design guideline components that we have in our development code. And we've provided a few examples as an attachment to your packet. As I mentioned, I think this year is going to be a little bit busy. SB 50 by Scott Wiener is a 2-year bill that didn't make it through last year. It's currently at the Senate. It needs to be reviewed and approved by the Senate by the 31st, in a few days from now. Otherwise, it won't make it to the Assembly. As of January the 6th, the League of California Cities is opposed unless amended. There's some scary stuff in there. Number one, it makes it such that a local agency will have to approve multifamily projects up to 4 units, and it will be ministerial, meaning there's no public body that gets to take a look at it for any of those standards. And also they provided conveniently a CEQA exemption for it in order for that to be applied. The curious thing, again, the ambiguity relates to what is considered a local flexibility plan. It's basically something that nukes the general plan or standards that the city may have in a zoning code. It basically says, if you don't do X, Y, and Z and create one of these things, SB 50's provisions will take place, basically removing the requirements of off-street parking standards. It'll provide for increased building heights and density in certain areas that the legislation discusses. And as I said, the league is a little bit concerned about it and has asked for local agencies to support it. There's support throughout the state from very few cities, but there are individual members of political bodies, city councils, that are in support of it. I want to kind of just focus our attention now to what a general plan is, without going into the level of detail that we have in the staff report. In essence, we have required elements of the general plan. And over to the far right, I apologize, I think the curtain's in the way there. Thank you. There's only one piece of a general plan that must be reviewed, and that is the housing element, which has to be reviewed every 5 years. What I provided here for your review is just looking at the goals, policies, and implementation measures that's current within the City of Sonoma's general plan that was adopted in 2006. You can see that the main issues are the chapter number 1, which relates to land use, and also the housing element. None of those other elements have a timing mechanism on them other than the housing element. With respect to our housing element, as I mentioned, it was last updated in 2015 with respect to the transportation element. It's an 8-year plan, the housing element is, and we're beginning that process throughout the state of California right now. Other jurisdictions in councils of governments, like ABAG is our local council of governments down in Southern California and Sacramento, they've already begun their 6th cycle about a year ago. So we kind of know what's coming from HCD, the state's Housing Community Development Department, with respect to what their regional housing needs are or have been assigned to them. We're starting that process in ABAG, and as we speak, there's a regional housing needs determination group meeting to determine how a number that comes from the state will be divided through the communities in Sonoma County. That process will take the next 4 months to a year to go through that process before we receive our actual allocation, the RHNA or the RENA number. We've provided here just a basic process, an outline of how we will go through that process. Typically the first thing, which we've begun already, is the vacant land inventory analysis. That's where we take a look at tables H2 and H3 for those of you who are paying particular attention, where we try to figure out where the best sites are, or opportunities, if you will, opportunity sites. Our current regional housing needs allocation that I was talking about just a minute ago was created a few years back, and you can see over in the far right column that we have 137 units allocated to the City of Sonoma, broken up into 4 income groups. And you can see that we have a very low group, low, moderate, and above moderate. Typically the market will take care of the moderate, so nobody really has to plan for that. But with respect to the other 3 income categories, you can see that it's divided up into not equal parts, but almost equal parts when it comes to very low, low, and moderate. By the end of this year, notwithstanding that we'll report slightly lower numbers for 2019, because Mockingbird and the Saha projects have pulled some permits, but not all of their permits in 2019. For sure, they will be completed and have pulled their building permits, which is the point the state of California is interested in. But by the end of this calendar year, we'll be well on our way to reaching the 137. We'll be above that. But as you can see in the low category, we would not have reached that number unless there are some other units that come online between now and the end of the year. Just to give you an example of what's going on throughout the state, you can see that in LA, they received a 329% increase over their prior allocation. Sacramento, I think, is 146 or 149%, I forget. So if you want to kind of play mathematician, you can certainly look at the last allocation that we received in Sonoma. That was 187,000, somewhere between Sacramento and Los Angeles. And I have not figured out why that just happened, Kathy. I apologize for that. So for those of you who like to just kind of twist your head, we can see that, well, at the end of the day, the north is to your left, and I apologize for that. It loaded up correctly, but apparently it kind of got messed up a little bit. This on a ball. Yeah. But the point being is this: we have put some plans out on the wall here for you to see. We've defined what a sphere of influence is. You can see the city's sphere of influence. We got some other maps a little bit later on. But I wanted to just point out that there's variations in colors. I do want to point out this is the same kind of map. And I want to point out some of the colors and what they mean. So you can see the UGB in the dashed line. North is facing up on this one, thankfully. To the top far left, you can see the spring specific plan area. That has been the topic of some conversation throughout the community. And you can see an inset bar over to the right under the title of the map that shows the full extent going up through Highway 12. The colors in purple, those are areas that are outside of the city limits, but inside the UGB. So you can kind of see that those are areas that show where development could happen. You may see a couple of places inside the city limits that also have purple colors. Those will be considered islands, which are surrounded fully by the green color is the Montini Preserve. That is actually outside the UGB, but inside the sphere of influence. Mr. Mayor, that concludes my comments as far as my presentation so far on the land use side of things. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions or comments from your City Council and Planning Commission.
No questions? Okay. Commissioner Barnett.
Thank you, David, for that presentation. My question regards SB 330, and there's some language in the staff report that says the law requires us to remove subjective criteria from the code, and I'm just wondering where in the law does that say? Because I thought the law said that we can't use subjective criteria to make the decision, and I bring that up because that law expires on January 1st, 2025. And so the question would be, why would we want to remove all that subjective criteria when perhaps we could use them again in 2025?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. What we're hearing from the people in the know in Sacramento is it's going to be re-upped. So it's not going to go away. And clearly that's the intent of the legislature. At least that's what's been told to me by a few of the folks.
Could we, and maybe this is a question with the city attorney, just put something in our code instead of removing all of it that said, until January 1st, 2025, we can't use subjective criteria to make decisions?
Well, you could say that, but it would be important to have something to take its place, obviously. And that would be the criteria that David and staff is now working on to replace those. Whether you identify a group of criteria that we all consider subjective and say those are not going to be in effect for 5 years,
right? Or
remove them entirely, replace them with these objective criteria, and then in 5 years, go back and change them to more subjective criteria. I'm not sure there's a big difference in doing it either way.
I mean, if it's re-up, that's one thing, but if it's not, I would want to be able to retain some of that subjective criteria.
You can always amend the code. It's not always you always get one chance at amending your zoning code. So it can be amended 40 times between now and then, and we can just determine whether we may find that the objective standards actually work better, or some work better than the subjective criteria, for example. And we wouldn't want to just bring wholesale all those subjective criteria back without reviewing them, obviously.
One other thing to add to that would be to take the design guidelines of the subjective criteria out with the design guidelines and place them in document. It doesn't mean you throw them away. It just means they're not part of the municipal code.
Councilmember Harrington.
Thanks. So in terms of this section of the agenda, we're going to have public comment and discussion, but the presentation was sort of a broad overview. What are you hoping to get out of this and what type of discussion would be helpful and kind of where are we going with this?
So the city council has had a number of conversations about the general plan and arena and housing. What you haven't had the opportunity is to hear from your planning commission about the general plan and about the development code. They are your arm to look really closely at the code, review projects with the code. I know that from conversations with staff, there's things that the planning commission believes as we look at the code and one, put objective criteria, and two, just other things maybe that have been stumbling blocks or need clarification. Again, the focus will be we're going to be bringing a variety of code changes back through the planning commission to council. And so this is an opportunity for the planning commission to say, here's some things we really want to look at as well, and you all to have a bit of a dialogue. Also for the community to talk about that as well. There'll be a lot more time to kind of dive into the detail of the code. There's going to be a lot of other meetings. But part of this too was just that context and landscape that we're working in currently and where staff's time and effort is going. And that also leads to the UGB in terms of just some of that housing landscape that is, could be impacting the UGB. Is that helpful?
Councilmember Burnett.
David, with regard to the survey, you referred to a vacant land survey. As you know, commercial properties are also available for housing development with roughly 20 units per acre designation. Are you also going to include for analysis those commercial properties that could be redeveloped or developed perhaps for housing alone or in combination with commercial?
Yes, it's not just restricted to vacant land. H2 is that particular analysis that you see in your current general plan, and H3 is the underdeveloped or reusable development piece.
Okay.
So yes, we'll be looking at that.
Okay, thank you. And then a second question. In reading through SB 330, I noted rather concerning to me that they really don't even refer to the issue of using subjective standards. They actually says subjective, quantitative standards. Now, to me, the operative word there is quantitative, because that means that everything about the approval process has to be reduced to numbers, because that's what quantitative means. And that therefore, whatever the standards are that we create need to be based on a quantitative formula, which is purely a number calculation. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, for example, as in the examples that we provided you, setbacks, those are quantitative. It's the shall look like the rest of the community stuff. And they wanted to take that away from local agencies to be able to provide that blend for any individual community.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Bohar.
David, in regard to Commissioner Barnett's comment about leaving the regulations in place for 5 years without changing the development code, but applying the state laws, I had heard that over the weekend from what I thought was an authoritative source. Obviously, it's hearsay, but it sounded reasonable. Apparently, the Santa Rosa and Rohnert Park are doing just that. And I think that would be worth exploring if someone could do that, finding out what our neighboring communities are doing in that regard.
As far as
Is that news? Have you heard anything about that?
I'm not quite sure, Commissioner Bohar, removing the subjectivity out of the code. I know a lot of jurisdictions are going through a zoning code amendment to put objective standards in their codes. Not quite sure I understood.
So what I suggest is not possible. Or
I think what he meant was, which Commissioner Barnett brought up, could you say these are staying in our code and put a separate section that says for this period, these won't be relied on so that you don't remove them entirely. And if that provision of the law sunsets and isn't renewed, that you don't have to amend your code and your subjective standards stay in there in addition to strengthening the objective standards. Is that possible? And I think the suggestion is that that's happening in Santa Rosa. Or where was the other spot? Rohnert Park.
Certainly we'll look at it, but the whole point of the legislation is to remove confusion. And I think having pieces where it's got one versus the other and then the dates in there. The whole point is try to make it easier for developers to go into any given community, know exactly what it is they need to do, and be done with it. Again, removing local control and removing the subjectivity out of it. We can certainly look at those agencies for sure.
But could we, I mean, if it's kind of clear that that piece of the code is dead during the time, it could just be kind of a dormant piece that then rises back if we're allowed to bring it back.
Worth looking at.
Good. Commissioner Barbos?
Going back to the requirement that for objective standards, I'm having trouble understanding that the legislature could actually intend that if it doesn't have a numeric component, something is subjective. For example, if you had a regulation that says, in this zoning district, the following architectural styles will be permitted: craftsman, colonial, etc. Or the following color palettes will be permitted, as they do in Santa Fe, for example. That's not subjective. Those are real things and people can point to them. So are we going to be totally without any ability to do anything like that?
No, my read of it is, and that's a great question. My read of it is when you use shall and must, those are mandatory constructs as opposed to permissive, which is may use the following colors. That's the kind of thing we'll be looking at.
But there's no requirement that anybody do it if you don't have a, I mean, it just goes back to what is an objective standard, and I'm having difficulty wrapping my mind around why it has to be numeric in order to be objective.
I tend to agree with you, Steve. I think that if you have, for example, samples of what craftsman is, if you have samples of what Santa Fe or New Mexico style is, and those are embedded in your code, and you have a palette of allowed colors, but it's a finite number, and they're clearly spelled out in your code, I think those would pass the objective standard. The SB 330 actually has a definition of what objective standards means, and I don't have it in front of me. I wish I did, but it's verifiable, readily ascertainable to the human knowledge in the course of man, et cetera, et cetera. But it's very, you have to be able to go to a book almost and find that particular standard in order for you to incorporate it into your code. It's much more akin to numeric analysis. But if you have colors, if you have things you can go and see and touch and identify in your code, I think those would pass muster.
And lastly, do you anticipate legal challenges to this? I can't imagine that cities like Santa Barbara, Carmel, and others are just going to throw away all of their attempts at preservation of their town character and just go to some objective numeric approach. Isn't there going to be some legal challenge to this?
I don't know that. Is anybody here on the dais familiar with the league supporting any kind of initiative to challenge this? We don't know of any right now.
Thanks.
Commissioner Barnett?
Further clarification on that, Jeff. From a legal standpoint, the language in 330 says objective, comma, quantifiable standards. Now, if my understanding is that comma could be the word and when terms like that are placed in succession divided by commas, it's as if there's an and between each item. So if it says comma quantifiable, doesn't that demand a numeric association?
I need to take a look at the entire definition to give you a response to that. I do not know, based on 2 words. Sorry, can't do that.
Thanks.
Other questions from commissioners or members of council? All right, seeing none, we're going to bring it out to the public for public comment. So we got anybody who wants to come, please step up to the microphone. Please state your name. Who do we have holding a microphone for public commenters? Can you grab that one there, Wendy? Perfect.
Test.
Great.
Good evening, Mayor Harvey, members of the council and commission, planning commission. My name is Bill Willers, 873 First Street West. Having participated in this event in the last go around for the development code, I think there's a lot of opportunity to take all of our objective standards, and as difficult as the process as it will be, convert them into objective standards by, in many cases, just simply removing should and replacing it with shall. And when that doesn't quantify, doing the hard work to make those quantifications. I think a lot of the rub that's come with the use of the development code over the time that it's been in place have been those subjective standards. And I think as a community we'll benefit from clarifying them. I look forward to the opportunity to do that. And also I think that from a timing standpoint, I think Director Storer is correct, and that is that we should do the hard work on the development code and then address the general plan revisions. So our general plan is I think a very viable document in its current form, still retains the qualities that our community retains and was recognized by the state when it was produced as an exemplary document. And we don't have to recreate that, but we do have to tighten up our development code to reflect that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Willers. Anybody else for public comment on development code?
Victor Conforti. Just a couple comments on the tightening up the development code. Over the years, I've seen many of the conflicts and objective issues that come up with the development code, and I know we can ferret those out. And along with Bill, there's a way to objectify a lot of things that don't involve numbers, so that's possible. For instance, here's a couple examples. There's, as you know, a provision in the mixed use zone and the commercial zones for 50% of the floor area to be housing. Except there's an exception that the Planning Commission, you defined criteria, can eliminate that requirement. And I think that would be a very simple thing to fix if you were to direct, if you felt like it, with eliminating the exception. Simply require all of them to be provided. And another example is in the mixed use zoning, and there's a description of the purpose of under the purpose of the mixed use zone, that it be the housing type, the apartments and condominiums. And then there's another phrase in the paragraph about that it's aimed at higher density growth that can accommodate citizens of the community, sort of vaguely talking about workforce housing. But that could be turned into an objective code where you actually make it clear that these are small apartments, and then define square footages for studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, a maximum square footage for each of those unit types. And so you can maintain the character of the purpose of the development codes, these different sections, and just add explicit language, get rid of may and should, and use shall. So it is possible to do. Thank you.
Mr. Conforti, anybody else?
Good evening, Michael Ross, 245 Patton Street, Sonoma. I speak about the development code. I believe I agree with some of these comments about objectivity versus subjectivity. The desired future text, for example, in the various planning districts in the town, quite often it's contradictory, and you'll be on one side of a contentious project, and the pros and cons will use the same text supporting their argument, and And I think that's sort of the weakness of subjectivity relative to that, even though everybody's heart's in the same matter that we want to promote small town character and things like that. And so I think it is confusing. Specifically, some of the things I'd like to address in the development code is that I believe it needs to be more updated and easier to use with more graphic examples. And I think we should start getting better at density. We speak about density, but we really don't know it or like it when we see it. And so in that regard, I would like to see design standards that address and promote density. And so we can design better 3-story buildings, for example, and how we locate them on the site. Maybe we ring 3-story buildings with 2-story buildings and place them in the middle of a site if the site's large enough or something like that. And also, I believe that the development code is largely silent on parking garages and how they could be located under buildings and next to buildings, and what's the optimum size and design criteria for parking structures, because I believe that densification, in order to use smaller sites, that we're going to have to stack residences on top of cars. I'd also, relative to that, I'd also like to see the development code relax the parking standards for housing developments. Currently, it's 1.5 cars per unit plus 25% for visitors. That is challenging on smaller sites in the infill city like our own. I would like to, for your consideration, at least drop the 25% surcharge for visitors. Maybe it's a pedestrian-oriented type of development. People can walk when they're a visitor. Also, the development code isn't just about housing. There's many other things that make this a wonderful place to live. And I think that promoting pedestrian connectivity between all of the city's downtown parks should be something that we could look at soon. There's a beautiful necklace of parks all north of the plaza that it could be better connected. And also, I'd like to encourage.
Mr. Ross, 3 minutes is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. When they're looking for 3 minutes for public comment, 4 minutes for at the dais. Thanks.
My name is Bill Hooper with Kenwood Investments, 144 West Napa Street. Not here to talk about a hotel today, actually here to talk about multifamily. Not suggesting that the urban growth boundary be changed or even the limitations on growth be changed, but perhaps just an implementation policy needs to be changed. Right now, the maximum allotments that we'll give out to a project is 20 units a year. So it's punitive to multifamily. If you're proposing a single residence or a duplex or something, you're going to get your allotments in your first request. Every year, the city council approves, roughly in August or September, the planning department's recommendation. And there's sort of a process in place of limiting it to 20. Currently, our company is developing several hundred units in the county. We want to do some in the city, but we're in our 4th year of waiting for allotments before we can even apply. So by policy, if you want to build 120, you have to have 60 credits in hand, which takes you 3 to 4 years before you can even apply. My suggestion is you might want to turn that on its ear to get the housing that you want right now, which is multifamily for rent product, and get that in the front of the line. If you look at how your allotments have been given out over the years, you'll find that the bigger, more expensive houses have been what's been given out and not the multifamily stuff. So you should take a look at that process. That doesn't require an ordinance change or an urban growth boundary change. And we've got a 5-acre parcel that's waiting in line, and it will take us 4 years before we're even able to apply. So I would have you take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hooper.
Hi, Fred Allbach, 19550 8th Street East, and I'm a person who makes less than half of the area median income per year, and so my primary interest is in the capital A, capital H, affordable housing contingent there. So I was glad for the staff report that showed the RENA numbers and that there would be 150% more. And so that kind of shows that the current ones aren't adequate and that there is a housing crisis. So it's good to see what's coming. And I'm glad, and I'm hoping to stand here tonight and speak for that section of housing. And before these state laws came out, we talked about in the Planning Commission and various city council meetings that the code needs to be revised. And so that was before these state laws came. And so I think that that in public policy, there's always a really good weasel word right at the heart of the policy, like, operational flexibility or sufficiently feasible or reasonably feasible. And so those are the kind of code things in the development code that seem to me that should be taken out to make area median income housing more possible. So I think that's something that would really benefit the workforce here. And so the workforce is another good weasel word because everybody works, so everybody could be in the workforce. So the workforce should be pegged to the area median income, and people who typically work don't make more than 80 or 100% of the area median income, and then they start to become middle class. If you're at 100% area median income, that's the middle, that's middle class. The workforce is below that. So I'm looking for the code to hopefully emphasize the area median income part. Am I 3 minutes up? Thank you.
I'm Dave Ransom. I live in Santa Rosa. I go to church in Sonoma, Sonoma United Methodist. I'm not speaking for the church tonight. I think that the real bottom line here is what the state has got in motion about. I'm sorry, you can't hear me, Larry. It's pushing for more housing without talking about what kind of housing. There's no question of where this is coming from. It's coming from the big developers and particularly the tech industry, which in this area is expanding while other parts of the workforce are not. I don't think there's anything in 330 about affordable housing. It's really trickle down economics, and that, of course, hasn't worked. It's trickle down in the sense that they're saying, look, if we build enough housing at a certain level, at market level, we'll end up with more housing for folks down below, and that I don't think is going to happen. SB 50 is a good example of what we're facing, and it is. I mean, Weiner is from San Francisco, and the San Francisco supervisors have voted already to oppose SB 50. And as it turns out, the strongest group behind SB 50, which is California YIMBY, is essentially a front for the tech industry. They've gone in and staffed it up, and they're putting a lot of money into their political operations. So I guess what I'm really getting at is that we're up against something that's pretty serious and pretty difficult to deal with, and so we really need to be together as a locality, as a community, and as a city, in order to be able to deal with this and probably reach out to other cities that are going to have to deal with this too. But it's coming, and I think the RENA numbers that are coming are going to be a big part of that. That comes, I think, from ABAG. And one of the things that hasn't been talked about here is AB 1481. 1481 set up a regional housing authority under the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, on the commissioners, if you will, which has fundraising abilities. It has plans to have a bond on the November ballot. And again, I don't think it's still essentially trickle down housing. So we're up against some big folks here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rich Wallach. I'm with Burbank Housing Development Corporation, and I was planning on speaking regarding the urban growth boundary, but there were some items that were also mentioned in the presentation just now, and I have to leave shortly to another meeting, so I wanted to make a couple of comments. One of them was and by the way, I'm new about this, and I'm here because we are working with Habitat for Humanity and a number of their projects that they are no longer involved in, and we're taking a look at some of them. And one of them was the one that they were coming before you on at 285 Napa Road in Sonoma. One comment is we're very seriously interested in that site. That would be outside the urban growth boundary, but adjacent to it. So we would be looking at doing a very attractive project. But the project that we'd be looking at would be for home ownership, similar to Habitat for Humanity. The guidelines that are presented here for the urban growth boundary going forward pretty much would make any affordable home ownership project prohibitive because of the income restrictions, 50 and 60%. In the presentation, you spoke about the RENA guidelines and what's low and very low income. I'm sorry. I was just speaking right now. I'm sorry. The RENA guidelines were showing the low as between 50 and 80% of AMI, and 80% is a good number for affordable home ownership, whereas 60% would probably be only for rental and for low-income tax credits. Anyway, I apologize that I can't be here for that portion of the evening, but wanted to just introduce myself and let that be known. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else rising for public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to Council and Commission for Council Member and Commissioner's comments. Go ahead, Councilmember Harrington.
I guess I'm just thinking one part of the discussion, in addition to changes to the code, will have to be an analysis of our infrastructure and what our capacity is. I know obviously the sewer is being repaired now, but in terms of taxing our parks, I mean, like stressing them, and our roadways. I know we had a presentation by the county. Councilmember Hundley asked, could the entire valley be evacuated if we had fire on all sides currently, the current number of people? And they said no. And that the answer was basically, we've planned that if we have a fire on all sides, people are going to be trapped here. And that's the current state of emergency affairs. I thought that was a great question. But as we plan to add substantially more people, it seems like emergency planning, making sure that we're not dumping effluent into our creeks, things like that needs to be taken care of. So I'm wondering, how is that going to get taken care of as we rush to build more housing, as we rush to bring additional people here and let people, you know, live closer to their work and all the things we care about? What about the nuts and bolts of that? And is that part of this?
Yes, it is a part of it. The infrastructure piece is an interesting one because as I've read the GMO, it was based on the premise that we had, the growth management ordinance. That is the piece that talks about the connection between sewer and water, and the code actually asks for us to review it every couple of years, which I know hasn't been done, but what has been done is each September staff has come to the council and said, here's how you allocate the 65, and maybe that could be considered the review, but it doesn't get to the underlying question of, do we have enough water? Do we have enough sewer? That's part A. Part B is the legislation last year does require agencies to review their general plans to provide for emergency planning, as you said. So that will be another part that could run parallel.
The follow-up is, if it's determined we don't have enough sewer and water, does it matter?
Right.
That's a question.
I'm not quite sure I understand.
So let's say it turns out we don't have enough sewer and water to grow at whatever our RENA numbers are. We still have to meet them, right? So it doesn't really matter.
Well, we have to provide, what the RENA does is says that a jurisdiction has to provide the zoning capacity to accommodate those numbers. You don't have to build it. But in order for a site to qualify, you would have to have access to transportation. They look for proximity to government services, libraries, sewer, water. There's a host of things for a site to be. HCD will just laugh it off, you know, if we just come up with some places that could never be developed. There has to be a legitimate attempt to show the right colors on the zoning map to meet those numbers.
Yeah, Commissioner Barnett.
Couple of comments. First of all, I think Dave Ransom focused on a point that is of great concern to me. When the redevelopment agency funding, which included a 20% portion for affordable housing, was eliminated, the affordable housing program for the city of Sonoma was eliminated as well, to all intents and purposes, other than the inclusionary zoning requirement. The city has now enacted legislation to backfill some of that money and to begin to accumulate funds for affordable housing. But it's going to take a significant number of years to accumulate enough money to provide a meaningful subsidy for affordable housing, which in my experience is the only way affordable housing gets built. In the past, the city of Sonoma has joined with other cities in Sonoma County to engage a lobbying firm to work with the legislature to push for policies that were advantageous to cities. And I'm wondering whether the city might want to consider merging its effort with other jurisdictions in the county to lobby the legislature and the governor for the reinstitution of affordable housing funding, because it's the piece that's missing. The current legislation, the SB 330 and this entire push for housing is supposedly addressing a housing crisis, but it's not, to my way of thinking, a housing crisis. It's a housing affordability crisis. And it's being misnamed, and it's, I think, unfortunately become essentially an excuse for the housing industry to recapitalize everybody's property and find additional ways to build. The other concern I have is that as this job has been articulated, I know the city is going to perhaps engage a consultant to help on this issue of changing the subjective to the objective language. But I think it would also be worthwhile to consider forming a working group that would consist of community members, council members, planning commission members, not a large group, maybe a couple of each, 8 people, 10 people at the most, who could also facilitate an examination of this particular requirement and lend their thoughts and expertise to it. I think we've got a lot of very experienced architects, people who've been studying affordable housing in town. There's a lot of expertise here that we could use, and I think forming a committee to make recommendations would be a plus.
Go ahead, Commissioner O'Neill.
I want to follow up on Commissioner Barnett. There were some comments out there that I thought were just so fabulous. And if we could get an engaged community group to dive into some of these details, especially some of the architects and the former planning commissioners that have experienced where the ambiguity in our language has caused problems for us. The shalls, not shoulds, pads, multiple pads. We all remember that one. So if there's something that we can do to quickly engage some of those very knowledgeable people that have way more history than I personally have, and going through where did we run into rubs in our current development code. And I'd echo Bill Willer's comments that this is actually, our development code is really good, but where we didn't quite know where the holes were till certain developers took advantage of it. And I think that those are the kind of things we have to really button up quickly. And I think that's probably something we can do relatively easily and quickly if we can get a good group of knowledgeable people that have the experience with it together and dive into those easy targets. Some of the other things are going to be a lot harder to do, but if we could start with that quickly, I would love to see that happen.
Anybody else? Yeah.
I'd like to jump in on a couple of things that came out, especially Councilmember Harrington's question about where do we go from here? What are we trying to accomplish? I think from the point of view of the Planning Commission, we are looking for priorities. And when we're talking about general plan and development code, we definitely feel that there's a very strong priority to dive into the development code first rather than work on the general plan. That can wait.
there are just too many areas, both with changes in state law and other ambiguities that have come up over the course of the years, that we need to address them, and we need to get them in place as quickly as we can. And having a focus group or a workshop group to help us on that is great, but we also need direction from the council to be able to fund the effort that we need with hiring consultants as necessary, so that we can move it forward and set a timetable and a meaningful resolution of this as quickly as possible. The other thing that Planning Director Storer referred to was this the new requirement for a limited number of meetings, and that is extremely concerning to myself and the rest of our commission, because we can eat up 5 meetings very quickly. Talk about study sessions, we talk about 1 meeting before a design review commission, another before a planning commission, an appeal before a city council. You've used up so many meetings that we are going to lose control of our ability to handle projects in this town if we don't resolve a way to consolidate the meetings. So we're looking for suggestions from the council on how we might do that, and I think we have to take a serious look at the interaction between design review and planning commission as part of that formula.
Comments from other council members or commissioners?
Well, it's kind of so broad, it's hard to know what kind of information is going to be useful from us. But I would say on a general note that that we've known for a while that we've had some issues with our development code. And as far as priorities, I see it as, you know, basically three steps. One being the immediate need of fixing things in the code for state law. And even that would be 2 parts. Part A would be the things that need to be done during the moratorium. The second part being things that just need to get done before we get into the general plan, or at least while we're getting it started. Then we do general plan, we dream about the future of the city. I think there's going to be a lot more to think about than it seems like some people do. But then after that, there's going to be another process of aligning the development code with the general plan. So I think at least for the short term, that even though we keep kicking the general plan down the road, that there is some stuff that we need to do with the code. I liked a lot of the comments. You know, one thing I think we've known, at least my time on the council, there's been enough large controversial projects to highlight the fact that our code and our system is not producing the results that we want. So we usually wait till the end and try to fight it and kill it at that point, rather than stepping back and asking why these tools are not producing the things that are aligning with what the city council keeps talking about as our priorities. And so I think that we need to be a lot more intentional about what's in the development code, and also clearly think about what our objectives are and how can the provisions of the code point developers towards things that are helpful, and then either point them away or prohibit things that are not helpful. Multifamily housing, that is the future, and I do think our process makes it extremely hard to build. And so I think that is a priority. And there's, you know, I think it has to be done carefully, because as many have pointed out, the problems with what's happening with state law is that, you know, it's kind of this build your way out of a housing problem suggested solution without recognizing that land will always be a finite thing, and things that are the most profitable to build probably won't be the things that cities need the most. So I think that the state's going to keep squeezing it. I think in 5 years it's going to be even tighter than it is now. I don't think they're going to reverse course on anything. So I think that the city just needs to figure out that, you know, we have a housing problem here. I think it is a far bigger crisis than even people who say they support it realize. I think it's absolutely a crisis, and we are every year just hemorrhaging people in our workforce and young families that can't afford to live here. And I think it's really important for us to have places for them. So I think being more intentional about it and having these goals in mind as we shape our code, and not just think about, I think a lot of the things we have now are more about, reducing conflict and the way things look and having everything be nice and neat. But as we're going to talk about in the next phase of this tonight, is that the city is on a course to be a dense urban city, and so we have to acknowledge that, and then we have to use the precious land that we have in the most efficient way possible. And it's probably going to look a little different, but I think that there's I think it's just something we're going to have to do. So all I have for now.
Anybody else like to make a comment? Bohar.
David, this is kind of directed to you, I guess, as a result of Chair Felder's comment about his concern about limitations on number of meetings or approved projects. Do you see any ways that the planning staff could vet these projects more rigorously before they come before the commission? Site planning, discretionary issues that are unlikely, or whatever. Do you see that as happening and shortening the number of meetings that are going to come before the planning commission?
So one thing that the commission that we did early in the process upon my arrival is we kind of reversed something that had been happening in the city, where projects could go through an entitlement process, the discretionary process, where it would go to the planning review by staff, go to the planning commission, go to the city council either through a legislative act that's being asked for, like a rezone or something, or even upon an appeal, and then post city council action. Then there's direction to go to the DRHPC, which has a whole host of, well, which is the timeline for the expiration of the permit. It's really based on the permit from the DRHPC because it says 15 days after that. It was a real problem for a clock to try to figure out when those permits were valid or unexpired. And so you had to do something very unusual in my view. What we did was the code does have a concurrency process. So we placed it such that if an item only stayed at the DRHPC, it went there, but upon a project requiring a DRHPC, it would go to them first, and then a recommendation would be placed to the planning commission. One thing I've seen done, and I've done it myself in prior jurisdictions, is the elimination of the architectural review committee or architectural review board, and then have lower level actions occurring at a staff level appealable to the planning commission, and that way you can kind of streamline that way. That would be one option that's there, but our review level of the staff doesn't change. It's a matter of how long do you go before it gets to a public body. Some agencies create a zoning administrator, if you will, where they hold public hearings. That's another staff function that we could have, and those would be appealable either to the planning commission or city council. Right now, the DRHPC actions are appealable directly to the city council, not the planning commission. So there are some things that we could do. I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but that some thoughts that crossed my mind.
All right, I got Barbos, I've got Wellender after that, and then we'll go to Barnett. DRHPC's Design Review Historic Preservation Commission.
Sorry.
For those who are not in the know.
A couple of things as a follow-up to what Councilmember Hunley was talking about occurred to me. In revising the development code, we have things, the objective, subjective area, but we also have a lot of things that both the council and the planning commission have run into where there's something missing, or examples on our side would be two recent things having to do with the proliferation of these commercial tents, finding we have no standards to either review them, govern them, and what have you. And so we're left sort of on an ad hoc basis trying to figure out what they should look like. Or another recent one had to do with demolition, and somebody came in asking us to decide whether there was a demolition such that they had to go before the Architectural Review Committee. And it turns out there was no definition that applied, and I'm sure that the council has run into a number of similar things where you just go, oh, how could we get here? We're missing something. So I think it might be helpful if we had sort of a ad hoc committee composed of some council people, some planning commission people, and from time to time, Mr. Storer takes some more of his time, but to sort of identify these things that each of our bodies have run up against that need fixing. So we don't just start at the beginning of the planning code and go look for things that need fixing. I mean, that can happen, but it's things, if we go put our collective memories to work, we can identify things that we've come up with or come up against and that need fixing and go to those first.
All right. We'll go to Mr. Wellender here.
Thank you. I have a question or follow-up for David. For clarity on this limit on the 5 meetings, describe what that scenario would be if the 5 were exhausted and there was no resolution yet. What would be the outfall of that?
Well, again, it's uncharted territory. I don't know if anybody's come up with that yet, but the clock on the 5 starts after the application has been deemed complete. And if I can just provide some background. So the pre-application process is one that a land developer, housing developer can instigate simply by just submitting that application. What that does is it freezes in the development code and your fees at that point in time. But they must submit a regular full application with 180 days. Otherwise, they don't get the benefit of those locked-in standards or fees. And then once that application has been deemed complete, the regular one, that's when the 5 starts. So I'd be limited in going to a study session. For example, our development code right now encourages study sessions, and we've done that at the Planning Commission from time to time. To assist developers, they get a sneak peek without a commitment from the Planning Commission. That'd be something I'd recommend that we look at. Great idea in principle. It now works against me, at least for 5 years, at least, starting that 5. And there is ambiguity about whether this means staff committee meetings as well as whether that counts or not towards the 5. I'd like to think that it doesn't. I think there's going to be a limitation in the interpretation on appeals. I just can't believe that a public agency will be prohibited from having appeals, maybe 2 meetings on an appeal or something like that, as we've experienced here in Sonoma. Does that help?
And before I make my housing comment, I was also curious. Oh, I guess I have to go to my housing comment. We've spoken this evening a lot about affordable housing, and one of the areas that I think we're kind of missing out on is also what I call that middle belt of housing. One of the things that attracted me to Sonoma way back in 1985 was at that time there was a pretty good mix of socioeconomic profile. And it seems where we do have an obligation to make sure that we can address the affordable housing both in an effective way and in a way that meets the state's mandates. But I also would like us to be as creative as possible to somehow come up with ways so that we can create the medium cost housing. And I don't have what that financial band is, and I'm not a developer, so I can't speak to the exact costs. But I think a healthy community is a community that has a very broad spectrum of people of all socioeconomic backgrounds. So to me, that would be a big goal and something that I want to be very vocal on as long as I remain on the commission.
Mr. Wellender, go ahead.
Just to follow up on the subjective versus objective criteria, obviously objective standards are mandated by the state now, but are preferable. My concern is obviously that we create objective standards that allow us to continue to retain our character and sort of that quaint charm that Sonoma is known for. And so if the working group, I think earlier commissioners suggested that, I would strongly support that, especially if there are potentially local architects on that commission, perhaps city council members, planning commissioners, because that sort of quaint small town charm that Sonoma is known for is very important because, in my view, it underpins our economy. and brings people and fills them in hotels, which supply a lot of the revenue to the city. And so obviously new housing units are also important for the economy because we need people that can live here and work in this economy. But unless we want to change our economy, we need to figure out a way and comply with state law to retain that character. And so if a working group or anything can be done, and if it's just changing a word to shall to maintain some sort of local control over determining character of projects, I think that's extremely important.
Great.
How are we gonna, what are the next steps on the process? There's been different ideas brought up tonight. I mean, there's some simple things. I was thinking, like, if you can only have 5 meetings and one of them is an appeal, you probably shouldn't start at 6 p.m. Might want to start earlier so that it, you know, if you have to do it all in one shot, it's not 3 in the morning when you're deciding. I mean, just, you know, kind of brass tacks. But what are the next steps to figuring out that whatever system's going to happen, subcommittee, whatever?
I'd like to make some comments before we go to that, if that's okay, because it's kind of, you know, wrap it up and then we'll go to break. So I appreciate that question. But so what I heard broadly from the commission and from the council is this sounds like there's broad support for an ad hoc committee. I support that as well. I think that would be really nice. We have a good brain trust here of local architects and people that have been in this town for a long time that can contribute to that. And I think that may take a little bit of pressure off staff if we can have a kind of ad hoc committee that's going through this and then bring that back to planning commission and work it through. So I think broad support for that I heard. I really agree with a lot of the comments that, you know, we need to design a development code that builds the housing that we need. Really appreciate the comments of really Michael Ross and Vic Conforti on this, trying to see if we can specifically look at sizes for housing and require specific sizing in multifamily dwelling units may kind of contribute to some of that middle class housing that we always talk about trying to bring forward. And I totally agree. I mean, when my parents first moved here, they were definitely in that middle class. If they were moving here today, there'd be no chance for them to purchase a home. And so we want to create those opportunities. I think having serious conversations about parking restrictions is important. And if we could get some definitions of that underground parking, I think it's a great idea. You know, we got to look, as we build housing, we should always be looking 50 years into the future. And I think the advent of self-driving cars, more transportation, if we're going to be building transportation focused housing, then we should be building it with the idea that people are not going to be driving, right? And if that's kind of the goal, climate smart housing that is more on the infill side, the goal should be you're not going to have a car, so there should be less spaces for them. That's kind of my opinion there. Interested in questions on the GMO. I'd love to see what other cities are doing. I know I've heard the city of Sebastopol is exempting housing at the 160% of AMI from GMO ordinances or growth management ordinances. I don't know if that's something that's right for Sonoma. It may very well not be, but it's a good idea. Appreciate the comments by Commissioner Barnett and others about trying to create an objective design standard that keeps kind of the community character. You know, if we could on Broadway say, you know, buildings shall not be taller than the tallest building on Broadway, or obviously we can create a number for that. If it's possible to add architectural styles, that may be something we want to do, but we may want to talk to that working group first to see if how that impacts the development. Yeah, I think that's kind of the end of my comments. I really do think that there's an opportunity here in some ways. I mean, we're removing some standards for sure, but digging through the development code is going to give us the chance to really kind of focus in and build the housing that Sonoma wants, the housing that Sonoma needs, and the housing that's going to create us for the future. So we should look at this as an opportunity and something I'd really like to do. Oh, one last comment. You know, when we're looking at inclusionary housing, I know some cities are starting to go to specific standards for what that means. We've seen most developers go to the 120. Maybe that's an opportunity where we can bring our kind of low income or very low income requirement into the mix. Maybe there's density bonuses and things like that is something I'd like to see Planning Commission discuss as well. All right, cool. And then if you want to answer Councilmember Harrington's question about what's the next steps, what's the next step in the process and kind of how to go forward here.
Okay, so I'll start and then have David add in. So knowing that this was this train was coming at us. Council approved either in end of October or November, $30,000 of one-time funding to help hire a planning consultant. That consultant has been working with David, and they are the ones that worked with David to craft the accessory dwelling unit ordinance changes, urgency ordinance that came through in December. So now if there's a desire to have a working group, I think we could, again, if the interest of council, what we may want to do is we may want to talk a little bit about, it could be a member 2 from council, could also be 2 members, maybe planning commission. And then, clearly there's been some expertise that has been seeking repeatedly at meetings that has a lot to offer. So I think the planning director could ask for an appointment. We're going to be back next week for council at a meeting on February 3rd, and you can make any subcommittee appointments that you want to, and you could, because maybe there's something with the UGB that you want to think about too. So we could make any final appointments at the February 3rd meeting of council. But meanwhile, again, we could have putting together a working group to work with probably a member of our staff and this contract planner, because there's already work underway, and then just start to chunk this so we can bring some of these forward. So.
Great. And I'm glad members of the public have signed themselves up for this working group. I look forward to that. It's very nice of you all. Any other comments or questions? Go ahead, Madeline. Yes.
It's on. It's on. Well, it's interesting. We talk about parking and mass transit. Has anybody seen any mass transit to the, I guess it's the west of 101? There's no mass transit here. So for us to dream, it's going to be here. I'll be dead a long time before SMART comes over the freeway. So I think that's something that's very, very important for us possibly to look at when you're talking about all of these issues, because it isn't here. It's not going to be here. I can't see it. And it happens to be one of the biggest issues here in Sonoma. There are a lot of things going on nationally, but when I speak to people, they talk about parking. That's what they talk about. So I just think that somewhere we have to pay attention to that issue. We don't have any kind of status within the county to be able to say, could we just move it a little bit over here? I think with respect to transportation, the best thing, of course, that's happened recently is that Fare Free program, which kids are really using. We're trying to encourage adults to be using that for different things. But I just want people to put transportation at the top of this list, because it does, and underground parking for the developers, I think that's pretty cost prohibitive, but I don't know. I don't know, a cement doesn't cost that much anymore. I have no idea, but these are things that the business people think about. So I just wanted to bring that to our attention.
The comments there.
So just Mayor Harvey, it might be helpful for staff and for council for make appointments next week when we have a chance to kind of chew this a little bit. It'd be nice to know from the planning commission who might be interested in serving on this working group. So maybe a show of hands of who might be interested would be helpful.
Kind of take your pick.
What kind of group is it going to be?
So my sense is this is a working group, so this would not necessarily be a Brown Act. We'd be pulling people together informally, working with a consultant. There's probably, I'm just guessing, there's probably 3 to 4 meetings here. There's some pre-work to give to folks so that you can come in and really chew through some things. So but maybe, is there anyone who doesn't want to? And then we may have to pull some names out from the hat, because again, we can't have a Brown Act violation. So it sounds like
everybody wants to be on.
Everyone who's interested,
so we'll
then we will do some pulling hands. Thank you very much.
And just to close on the transportation piece, I do agree with Madeline that it is the missing piece. I was up in Sacramento for the League of California Cities, and there's a lobbyist there that for cities who's talking a lot about housing, and I pulled him aside and said, look, a lot of this housing stuff is coming through. I understand we're fighting there. We should keep fighting there. But the piece to start asking the state for is more money for transportation. If we're going to have all this additional housing legislation come through, where's our transportation bill? Where's $1 billion for transit? And I think that, if you have any opportunities where you're getting in contact with state assembly members or state senators, that's a good opportunity to say, okay, we're trying to design housing for the future that's denser and more transit oriented. We have to build transit too, and so we're going to need state funding for that as well. So with that, I was going to go to break, but okay.
In reviewing 330, I noted that there's a lot of language in there about homeless shelters. And there has been no discussion here tonight about that kind of housing. The fact is that many of the provisions in 330 have to do with providing shelters. And this is another area where I think the city and the county jointly have to look at developing a permanent housing solutions for the homeless population. These are not going to be people who pay rent. This is not going to be a profit-making activity, but somehow or other the money's going to have to be gotten in order to house this population, which is going to explode over the next 5 years.
Okay. And with that, we will adjourn for break. Short, what do we got? 10-minute break. Need coffee or whatever, go for it. And then we'll come back and talk about the UGB. Mike's off. All right, if we could have our commissioners and council members start making their way back to the dais. We'll get this moving. You can bring your snacks up here, that's fine. Rachel brought some cookies. I've got fruit. Yeah, that was shade. All right. Yeah, we're going to have another presentation. All right. We're waiting on one more Kelso. Okay. How are we doing, Kathy? Kelso's finally made his way back to the podium. Good job, Kelso. All right, ready to go? Great. All right, so we're going to be moving into part 2 of our joint planning commission and city council meeting here. I'm going to give it to David Storr. We're going to be discussing the UGB for a little staff presentation.
Thank you again. So in November 7th, 2000, the voters approved the urban growth boundary for the city of Sonoma, which basically amended the general plan at that time, setting a cornerstone policy that created the maps, created the lines on the maps that you'll see on the walls around the room. The UGB operates generally to try to encourage all discretionary development inside the UGB. Recall that it can only be applicable to land within the city limits. If there was to be development in the UGB that's outside the city limits, that land would need to be annexed before it could be developed. With respect to the discussion that we had at the city council previously, we were asked to return with information relating to infrastructure that had been placed outside of the city limits and outside of the urban growth boundary. So in your packet, we've provided that information. Basically, there are a total of about 300 outside the city water connections. And I've provided for you some information here on the slide that talks about when those were done and how they were done, with OSAs being outside service agreements. Basically, the storyline starts in 1970 when the Thornsberry Road Area Water Assessment District was created, along with the tank that's out there, and I've provided that in the maps. I think I haven't found, oh, I did show you earlier the map of the boundaries, and I just want to keep that in mind. So up in the northwest of the corner here of the city was the area that we're calling the Springs Pacific Plan. I haven't talked, you don't see on here the Montini Preserve, and you kind of see the islands inside the city limits. But the yellow pictures, the yellow parcels that you see there, those are properties that we have got water connections to that have happened since and prior to the UGB in November of 2000. And then you can kind of see those properties. There's a very few of them where we've actually got OSAs and non-OSAs. The Thornsbury district is to the far east or the far right of the map. There's a dashed line there. You can see one little red parcel there where we actually entered into an OSA within the Thornsbury assessment district. And I really can't speak as to why that was done or not. So what I wanted to do is focus the attention of the discussion tonight to certain areas within the language of the current UGB language. We have a general plan implementation measure. We have a policy. We've provided that in the staff report. As we go through the next few slides, we'll be able to show you, and the city attorney can show you suggested language. We put some preliminary language there that could help explain or expand upon what's currently there to make it clearer. One example is how do you implement the 5-acre, 20-acre provision that's in the UGB? It's not been done, but here we are today talking about it, and we could get some clarification on that. And so I'll turn the time over to the city attorney to talk about some of those things. We provided a handout for the public. Kathy's showing it here if you want to kind of use that as your script. And we could have the Planning Commission and City Council provide some direction on what's an appropriate term of a new UGB such that we can provide some information to staff and provide language that we could place on the ballot in November. So I'll turn the time over to the city attorney as we go through these items.
Thank you, David. The predominating motivator in the documents that are attached to the materials today regarding the UGB is to have something on the ballot in November. That necessarily means that we cannot be modifying the existing UGB to any material extent, because if we do that, that will trigger CEQA. And it's highly unlikely that we'd be able to conclude CEQA in time to place this measure on the ballot, which is required to be done by the first week in August. That's when the Elections Department for the county requires our ballot measure to be submitted to it. So in your packet, pages 24 through 35. Yes, is the old or the existing UGB modified in red line and strikeout format, so you can see how we are proposing changing the existing UGB. And you'll notice that most of the changes are for clarification. We have, and we'll go through those. The first issue that needs to be addressed is how long should this UGB be? The existing UGB is for 20 years. Do you simply want to extend it for an additional 20 years? For longer, for shorter? That's a policy decision for the council to make. Remember too that the council always has the power to put something on the ballot that might modify this UGB in the future. So even if you were to take the UGB as it currently exists and make some minor tweaks just to bring it up to the current time, and put it on the ballot in November, it gets passed. 3 years later, you could put a new measure on the ballot. Again, likely that would trigger CEQA. But there is certainly that theoretical possibility of putting a new and a different measure to amend whatever you decide to put on the ballot in November of this year. So issue number one, how long is this going to be? Number two, the existing UGB provides that there are certain uses that are not considered urban development, because that's critical, because the UGB as currently written and as proposed in the documents before you tonight, the UGB reads, the UGB is a line beyond which urban development will not be allowed except for public schools and public parks. only uses consistent with the general plan agricultural land use designation as it existed on February 25, 2000, and the definition of open space lands as set forth in a particular government code section will be allowed beyond the UGB. So those four kind of land uses are by definition excluded from urban development, and thus they are allowed beyond the urban growth boundary line without having to amend the UGB at all. The four uses again are public parks, public schools, agricultural uses, and open space uses. The UGB that is currently in existence and that is being proposed, at least in the document before you tonight, however, grants the council the power to amend the UGB, to actually move the line, the boundary, to encompass adjacent properties for two purposes. One, if refusing to do so unconstitutionally takes a private property owner's property without just compensation in violation of the United States Constitution, or to provide for housing for very low and low income households. So this particular UGB that's in force right now and that is being proposed creates two exceptions. Allows for the UGB to be amended by the council. The UGB can be amended by the people, the vote of the people, at any time for any reason. But if the council is going to be amending the UGB, it only can do so for those two purposes. When the existing UGB says the UGB is a line beyond which urban development will not be allowed, that is sort of a no-duh. Because in the city of Sonoma, the UGB is essentially the boundary of the city in most instances. And the city has no land use power beyond its own boundaries. So to declare that there cannot be a development outside the city has no power to say that. The county has the power to control what goes on beyond the limits of the city. However, the city has an ace, and the ace is water service. And around the northern and eastern and southern portions of the city, it controls water. We know that the Valley of the Moon Water District controls water in other areas outside the city's limits, primarily to the northwest and to the west. But in the portions where you saw all the water extensions and connections was that yellow? Yellow on that map. That is the area that the city has power over in terms of extending water. And that's the power it has to enforce its UGB. They go hand in hand. That essentially does allow the city to declare there shall be no development outside its boundaries or outside UGB because it can prohibit water from extending out in that area. And thus there will not be any development, even development that the county might otherwise allow or permit. That is why there's language now in this UGB that specifically addresses the issue of water and says there will be no water service outside the UGB except for those four uses I earlier described that are defined as not being urban development and the two exceptions. Water service can be granted to those uses outside the UGB, or if the council agrees to amend the UGB line to include affordable housing, for example, the city under this UGB that's before you tonight would allow water service to be extended to that residential project. I'm talking right now about water connections, and on the sheet that's been handed out to you, it's topic number 5. It's the very bottom. I'm sort of skipping around here. I'm not moving in a numerical fashion here. So at the very bottom of this page is a discussion of this issue of no extending water service. Now, there are exceptions to that. One is the Thornsberry Assessment District, long time ago, was established under which the city agreed to provide water to the properties located within that district. That's an exception. That he does not have to, council does not have to amend its UGB line to allow water to go to that those properties. Number 2, if some property owner outside the UGB has vested rights to water, that property owner is entitled to have the water. And finally, if there's a contractual obligation that the city has to fulfill to provide that water, the city would be required to provide that water, even though the property might be outside the UGB. That's the second issue I want to talk about. The first one, again, being the term of this UGB. The second is the water is your hammer. Don't forget that. Number 3, let's talk a bit about the affordable housing acreage exemption. That's item number 2 on this sheet in front of you. The current UGB reads that the council has the power to amend the UGB 5 acres per year by adding no more than 5 acres per year to accommodate affordable housing for very low and low income households. And that no more than a total of 20 such acres can be added to the UGB over the life of the UGB. We are proposing one, I call it a tweak to the this section, which simply says, how do you measure that acreage? And we are proposing that you exclude from that acreage areas that cannot be built upon, such as setbacks, riparian setbacks, front yard setbacks, side yard setbacks. Those kinds of areas where building cannot occur would not be included in the calculation of the acreage that a developer might include within his or her project application for very low and low income housing. Number 3 on your sheet is, what does it mean to have affordable housing? The current UGB states that the housing must primarily be for low and or very low income housing. Primarily is not defined. That's the word used, however, quote unquote, primarily. That's what the existing UGB provides. We've inserted a parenthetical and put in 51%. This actually tracks Rohnert Park's UGB language. Rohnert Park's voters just approved its UGB extension in November of last year, some 2 or 3 months ago. We've gone ahead and also defined low income. In the sheet before you will see in blue line format low income being defined as 60% of the area median income, and very low income being defined as 50% of area median income. As the speaker from Burbank Housing indicated, these are the criteria utilized to establish very low and low income housing for rental purposes. I think the speaker made a very good comment that we should also include a definition for owner affordable housing too. And he was arguing that it should be 80%. And I don't know if that's a correct number or not, but it should be confirmed. And I think by adding another sentence or so here that would say if the housing is for ownership, then the percentage would be different of the median area income. That's item number 3 on this handout before you. Item number 4. One of the criteria the council must satisfy, or that the record must satisfy, and the council must make a finding in order to allow affordable housing to be embraced in an amended UGB, is that there is no existing vacant or undeveloped residentially designated land within the UGB, I'm now reading from the existing UGB, to accommodate the proposed development, and it is not reasonably feasible to accommodate the proposed development by redesignating lands within the UGB for low and or very low income housing. Again, following the lead of Rohnert Park's UGB, which has similar findings, you'll notice that as we move through this process over the next month or two, because I suspect we may be bringing forward to you some sample UGBs that other communities have adopted, they are very similar. They have similar criteria, they have similar exemptions. They're not identical, but they're very similar. Rohnert Park's very similar to Sonoma's in this regard, and it has inserted a definition of feasibility, which is, it's not precise, no question about that. It says, for purposes of this subparagraph, feasibility shall include consideration of market feasibility, environmental feasibility, and other rules and regulations affecting the development of the property. I noticed that in SB 330, it also contains a definition of feasible. And it ain't any more specific. It reads, feasible means capable of being accomplished in a successful manner within a reasonable period of time, taking into account economic, environmental, social, and technological factors. Number 5, we've already talked about 5, the outside water connection requirement. Let me see if there's anything else that I would like to touch upon. Again, we are not proposing that the UGB boundaries itself be changed. We are preserving the existing UG boundaries. We're not proposing that an additional amount of acreage be permitted to be included within the UGB on an annual basis for very low or low income housing or any other kind of residential development. We're basically retaining the existing substantive provisions of the existing UGB. This in order to avoid any serious CEQA issues. And as you, I think, all know, when cities propose legislation and offer it to the voters through a ballot measure, the cities have to comply, as do counties, with CEQA. The voters don't have to do that. If the voters circulate a petition, they get sufficient signatures and something gets on the ballot, CEQA is not relevant, does not have to be complied with, but cities have to comply with it. One last thing I think the council needs to take serious consideration of, and that is this. In the existing UGB, it has language that's that could be more precisely fashioned. It provides that on December, if no new UGB measures put on the ballot this year, and the existing UGB is allowed to continue as it is, there's language in the existing UGB that says on December 31, 2020 at midnight, a specific portion of that UGB measure evaporates. It's no longer in effect, and the council is allowed to amend the general plan and the UGB. I think we need to have a discussion about that, because if we want to retain the same kind of language in a substitute UGB, what is it that we really want to accomplish? Are we doing away with the UGB entirely? Is that the purpose and intent of the language that's there now? Is that what we want to do? Or are we still interested in retaining the UGB's boundaries, but the council has the power to do what within the boundary or create exemptions? It's just not clear. And that's an issue I think we should talk about and get clarity from the council and the commission as to what you'd like to see happen in the end of the next UGB, whenever that might be. Want it to extinguish itself entirely, sunset entirely, or do you want pieces of it to remain with the council having a little bit more discretion to make amendments to it, and if so, under what criteria? That concludes my comments.
Kathy, other members of staff have anything?
Yeah, so I think that's it. We'll come back to that's it for this piece, talking about the UGB, and then we'll come back at the very end in terms of what we're looking for from council. But at this point, we would entertain questions from council and planning commission.
Great. Okay, I appreciate the presentation, David and Jeff. Fantastic. We've got a lot of questions going on here. We'll start with Larry. Go ahead, Mr. Barnett.
I just want to clarify an issue you raised, Jeff, which is that the city's requirement under CEQA, when it places a measure on the ballot, does not in and of itself trigger an EIR. It does trigger, if I understand it, and I'm looking for you to confirm it, it does require a CEQA review, which could be as simple as a negative declaration. It does not, by the act itself of placing it on the ballot, trigger an EIR, unless, of course, there were major and substantial changes to the dimensions of the UGB.
Generally, you're correct, Larry. What it does trigger would be the preparation of an initial study,
Yes.
which then assesses whether there's significant environmental impacts or not.
Right.
And based upon that assessment and conclusions, then you go down various paths, one of which could be an EIR, mitigated negative deck. We're in sort of a world right now where MNDs and negative decks and exemptions don't seem to be terribly popular in the city of Sonoma. and we are getting sued by people who believe we should be conducting more rigorous environmental assessments right now. If it's even a wobbler, at least your legal counsel will say we're going EIR. That is the safe legal course to take. And if we do an EIR, no way will this UGB get in the ballot in November. EIRs take 6 to 12 months, cost $150,000, and it's a long process.
All right. Commissioner Barbos? A microphone for Commissioner Barbos there. Do we have another mic we can give them?
I have a couple of questions that have to do with comments I was going to make, but something that Mr. Walters, one of his recent comments, caused me concern about the extent to which we could make changes in the language without triggering CEQA concerns that would render it infeasible to get this thing done in time. For example, the minimum of 5 acres per year, I'm interested in talking about that. But if even considering changing the 5 acres throws us over the line, so to speak, on the CEQA question, then that's something that I would like to know. Similarly, some of the other language, this says to comply with state law regarding provision of housing for all economic segments. As an introduction, that's a qualifier. My own preference would be to add some additional language there, or to provide housing, affordable housing deemed necessary by the city council as an additional condition that could be met before they don't have to wait for RENA to tell them they need to do something. They can just decide to do it. But if I'm just wondering if these are, to this paragraph, are changes that would trigger CEQA.
I think that language that would allow the city council to determine that very low and low income housing is appropriate, whether or not compelled by RENA numbers, would not be an item that would trigger serious environmental concerns. However, changing the 5 acre minimum, if it's to increase the annual acreage, would be a serious CEQA issue. No question about it. Obviously, if you were to increase it to 500 acres a year, obviously that's a CEQA problem on its face. If it's 25 square feet more, probably not. So there's obviously some place in that continuum that you've tipped over the CEQA scale.
If you stayed with the 20 acres, would say changing the 5 to 10 be a problem?
Well, you're doubling it. Doubling. That's clearly a CEQA problem, and whether that can be addressed in a mitigated negative declaration, unclear, because you don't know how dense you're going to be making those additional 5 acres every year. Are you going to allow 50 homes per acre? And you can see that the math gets fairly significant.
Commissioner Barnett?
Just to follow up on that, you recommended changing the language in terms of the acreage exemption from gross to net. Sometimes, depending on the property, it's only 50% buildable, which would be in effect doubling the acreage requirement. So to your point earlier, in terms of how would you analyze that in terms of requiring CEQA?
That wouldn't bother me because there's not going to be any impact. If you're not going to build on a piece of land, you're not going to build on it. It will not have any environmental effect. There has to be some physical impact. And so if you're not including acreage that will have no physical impact on the environment, then I don't see an issue with that.
Even though it could potentially double the number of units?
I don't see that. You're eliminating if you have, let's assume you have 10 acres, only 5 of which is buildable.
Mhm.
I'm unclear how that would double the number of units.
Each year, we're allowed to do 5 acres a year, right?
Right.
So in effect, as long as it was capped at 20, perhaps it wouldn't double the number of units, but it would in effect be doing the equivalent of 10 acres a year if only 50% was buildable.
It would double the acreage, not the units. Yeah.
Double the acreage, but it's
Well,
not
it could-
necessarily,
it could
it may
you
not
could
have, may
yield-
not have any impact on the number of units.
If there was a cap at the end, right?
But-
A 20-acre cap.
But if you previously said all 5 acres of that property are counted towards the 5 acres, and now you say only the buildable portion of that 5 acres is counted, you could have many more developments because you would say only the portion
Right.
that's developed counts towards the 5 acres. Instead of having a 5-acre parcel with 50% undeveloped, now you're saying I can only develop 2.5 acres here. And instead of being prohibited from developing a new 5-acre parcel, now I can do 2 5-acre parcels where I only develop half of them.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Council Member Harrington.
And I don't. Okay, I don't know if does that increase the number of units being developed. I don't think necessarily it does it?
Well,
Yes.
previously you couldn't do the second 5-acre parcel because all of the 5 acres of the first parcel would have been counted, although only 50% could have been developed. So now, if we're only counting the portion that is developed and not everything else, 2 could be done in 1 year theoretically.
I see that. Okay, that's a good point. Even though the same number of units would be buildable in either scenario, now we have more space being utilized. I guess it is. Well, yeah, different spaces are being utilized for the development because the net amount of developable land is remaining the same. It's 5.
Yes.
You cannot develop more than 5 acres per year, and you. So I guess there may be some
Yes.
environmental effect to that, and maybe that's a good reason why we don't want to have a net number. We just have a gross number and live with that. That would be certainly safer. Get rid of
Councilor Huntley,
that.
did you
Just
want
get
to
rid of
jump
the language about net acreage.
Commissioner Bohar. Nope. Anybody else have questions? I have a question. So I noticed that there's a potential here to exempt setbacks and kind of required setbacks and required pieces. Would it be possible to include parking in that as well? Or would that be too large of a increase to?
That's what we're talking about right now is should we be subtracting from the gross acreage any land at all to come up with the net developable acreage for the project? Parking, you're building something on the parking, aren't you? You're building a hardscape, and you might even be having solar panels on top of that. Probably you wouldn't be subtracting the parking area from the acreage. It would be included.
So it'd be something. I mean, so in your setback area, would we be saying you could do no landscaping there?
Landscape wouldn't be okay. It currently reads no structures.
Okay.
Any area where no structures would be permitted will not be counted. But it does yield the issue of having 3 or 4 smaller developments being allowed in a given year. The net acreage totals 5, cannot total more than 5, rather than having one big one. The total, which is 5. The net total is 5.
Understood. Councilmember Harrington.
Just a quick recap. So it seems like, assuming we're renewing the UGB, the 2 options are: 1, the council puts it on the ballot substantially the way it is now, and the question is how long. And the second option is the public puts it on the ballot with changes that would require an EIR, whatever those are. We don't have to cut that right now. And that would not be subject to CEQA. And so no EIR is required. So our discussion is, do you want to make substantial changes? If so, the public probably has to put it on the ballot. Or do you want to keep it the same? And if so, for how many years? Is that the question that we're talking about?
Certainly one of them.
And then for the process going forward after this meeting, what are we thinking about?
So in terms of a process afterwards, staff was looking at trying to move this forward fairly quickly so that decisions are made and council's making a final decision no later than May, maybe April. So it's a pretty tight timeline here to kind of chew this through. It's really February, March, and bringing something back. So our thought is to have 2 council members work on an ad hoc, be working with the city attorney, planning director. If the council wanted to have 2 members of the planning commission, I think that, again, we've done this on some other ad hocs where the council can reach out and invite someone to a meeting to learn more or get additional information. So little stakeholder groups, they can do stakeholder research or outreach in a way, but it lets us move quickly, and we're going to need to do that in order to, I think, to bring back a final product for you to react to. We've gone back and forth. In a perfect world, you would have a draft that maybe the working group would work through, and then maybe you'd bring it to planning commission for vetting and then council. I don't think there's going to be potentially time to bring it to planning commission, which may be another reason maybe to have 2 members of the planning commission, 2 members of council, and then you're going to bring kind of this final product back to the council for action.
We had Council or Vice Mayor Hunley had requested to do a question, and we'll do Sheila next.
For our number 3, could you remind me where in this example the 51% came from? That was Ronert Park.
Ronert Park.
And is this number of units or site coverage?
Would you ask that again?
Like the 51%, is that the number of units, 51% of the units, or 50% of the site coverage?
I was thinking it was 50% of the units, but we can certainly clarify that.
And so there's, so for this purpose, we're just starting with their point. They decided the low, very low, but not include anything above that. So this is just came from Ronert Park.
Well, remember, this is the language that's been in place for 20 years here in Sonoma.
So before it was just low.
No, it was low and.
Oh, I see.
Low
and or very low.
Yeah. And or are inserted. For some reason, the and or did not get in the original version.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner O'Neill.
Yeah, for my education and clarification, it's really, is it an either or? The city council puts it forward on the ballot, the city puts it on the ballot, or the public. But if the city decides to just, without drastic changes to the UGB, puts it on the ballot, that doesn't preclude a member of the public from either at this point or at some point in the future of coming up with their own proposal for something that goes on the ballot, right?
That's correct. Well, if there were competing measures in November, the one that garnered the largest number of votes wins.
Vice Mayor Hunley.
And for the, so going back to this 51%, say it's units, does the current, as far as like a question of whether they would have to be comparable between the affordable and non-affordable, is that something that would have to go in this, or could it be something that would be, you know, refer back to some internal policy like our inclusionary ordinance or something? Or do we have to think about now, like exactly like 51%? Because I can think of all these things that people would do to, you know, build like all your tiny little things over here just so you can build your things over here. So we have to like think about all that and put it in this document.
I think we could do all that, the fine tuning, digging down to the details in a zoning code amendment. In fact, there's language later on in the UGB that says the city shall adopt policies, ordinances, et cetera, that are consistent with this UGB. And I would say that those would be consistent.
And the point Vice Mayor Hunley just brought up kind of brings me to think about the development code again, where we have had this issue where, you know, kind of the understanding that I had was that inclusionary units should be similar and indistinguishable from the market rate units. That seems to be kind of a subjective standard at this moment, or is easily waivable. And so that, you know, maybe adding some more objectivity to the development code, a little bit more restructuring of that may kind of protect from that sort of issue of teensy tiny units that are the affordable requirement and then larger market rate units. We may want to add some flexibility to allow it to be feasible, or maybe not. We'll have to look at what works through the development code working group. Yes, Commissioner Barbos.
I'm a little confused about the language in this this paragraph that we're looking at. If we're tweaking, what is it primarily supposed to accomplish? It consists of primarily 51%. Why doesn't it just say 51% low and 49% very low? I mean, isn't that what we're trying to say? No?
No, I think
So what's primarily supposed to do?
It gives you a floor, but not a ceiling. You could have 100% if you wanted.
Oh, okay. So we're not talking about 100% affordable.
No.
Could we do that without triggering CEQA?
I don't know. I don't know if that has any impacts on the physical environment. I just don't know.
Okay, I don't know where I got the idea we were on board with 100% of affordable if we were going to expand into the UGB. But anyway, that's a topic for discussion, I guess.
Be tough for our city attorney to be put on the spot about what is and what is not requiring an EIR. I just want to recognize that.
Great. Any other comments from the dais here? Questions? Sorry, questions. Yes. There we go. All right. I'm seeing no other questions from the dais. So we'll go out to public comment. Got Wendy here with the microphone. We're limiting public comment to 3 minutes. So we've got a warning here that you can't really see. So I'll kind of just raise my hand as you get, a minute, 30 seconds. All right. So just kind of pay attention to that. And we'll open public comment now. The rush. Here we go. Fred in first place.
Hi, I'm Fred Allbach, 19550 8th Street East. I would like to advocate for language changes here that would make this possible Burbank project on 285 Napa Road more possible. When I look around that area and see 240 market rate units coming in, it just doesn't make sense to me why the city can't throw a loop around 285, give some water and make it work. Because that's the kind of housing that we need, and that's what this affordable housing is designed to do. So with acreage, I would say if we get more affordable housing as an unintended consequence, that would be good and not bad. And I would say that I would go for an overage in any 1 year is okay, as long as it's not over the total of the 20 per the term of the UGB. I would suggest that. And then for primarily affordable housing, I would like to just second that make it so that a Habitat or a Burbank type project can happen. Err on the side of that, because that's the type of housing that's really been excluded from the community in large degree. So that question is about what kind of affordable housing qualifies for annexation. And so I think the language needs more flexibility, and only a nonprofit builder is going to build a project that has primarily 51% very low or low anyway. No market rate builder is going to even touch that. So I would say maybe language that say the proposed development be built by a nonprofit builder at AMI rates with a strong percent of very low and extremely low, or low and very low, with a majority of total units at or below 80%, so that you include that type of owner project. And then for reasonably feasible, that's just a perfect weasel word phrase that people could argue about, like lot pad size or whatever. So let's take the ambiguity out of reasonably feasible, and then redesignating is also something that seems to me to be upzoning, and that you can only really do that if you have a specific plan. Who gets to the city doesn't get to redesignate things like that, I don't believe. I think it's the owner. And as far as the minimums not exceeded, I would toss that out of the UGB, because why would you want to have only the minimum of affordable housing when you could have more, when that's a necessary type of housing as seen all around the Bay Area. And am I out of time? So anyhow, that's my essential message, is that I would really like to see you to give the UGB sufficient flexibility to allow a Burbank type of project. And that's my main message. Thank you.
Dave Ransom. I live in Santa Rosa. I go to church in Sonoma. Tonight I'm speaking for the Sonoma Valley Housing Group and not for myself. We support the concept of an urban growth boundary. We support the existing urban growth boundary with some amendments. We recognize that the folks who want to continue the UGB without change are honest people with good intentions. We know that they support affordable housing when they get the chance. They are right that the UGB didn't cause the affordable housing crisis, but now some of its wording makes helping to solve that crisis more difficult, and that's like what we'd like to see change. Indeed, when we consulted a land use attorney, their opinion was that the language of the current ordinance actually works to prevent affordable housing development. That assessment was seconded in talk with David Goodison when he was planning director. The requirements for extending the UGB for affordable housing are, for all practical purposes, currently impossible to meet. We have read with interest the staff report. We can't say that we have fully digested it, but clearly staff agrees with us on some points and suggests important changes in the language. We want to thank them for that and thank the council members who started this ball rolling. Staff makes an important observation that oncoming RHNA requirements are going to demand even more affordable housing in Sonoma, and they are not going to allow the city to dawdle. Indeed, the staff has included a draft UG provision that this general plan amendment is not intended to prevent the city from meeting its obligation under state housing or zoning and planning law. That gives the city some latitude. We also appreciate the attempt to roust out the subjective language. Perhaps that language includes the phrase small town character. We'd like to point out that there's no mention that another, more populous, well-serviced metropolitan area, the Springs, already exists immediately to the north and the west. Taken together, Sonoma and the Springs and the rest of the unincorporated area in Greater Sonoma comprise the fourth most populous city in the county. No other city in the county has so significant a part of its local residents outside its boundaries. Sonoma has effectively exiled its workforce to the Springs and beyond. Now, I must say, as a personal aside, this is not the housing group speaking, that it appears to me that the best way to protect ourselves and the lands we want to protect might be to annex them and the rest of Metro Sonoma. We appreciate the serious work done by city staff. We appreciate the chance to talk to the council and the commission. We're sorry that it couldn't be arranged to give us time for a more comprehensive presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. David Morrell, 483 Mall Court. I'm here as a citizen of Sonoma, not in any of a number of other capacities that many of you recognize me in. Certainly here just speaking on my own. I haven't consulted with any of the other groups to have their authorization. I'm here in great support of the UGB. It's been a very important from an environmental perspective over the past years, but it needs some added flexibility to meet the current crucial needs on affordable housing. I see staff has made some good success already at dealing with some of the critical issues. I brought some specific language to suggest, which Planning Director Storer tells me is somewhere in your packet with other correspondence, and I have a few extra sheets for interested members of the public. I'd like to highlight a few of the critical pieces. Well, in 3 minutes, this gets, or the 2.5 that are left, gets to be very difficult. First of all, on the issue of the 5 and 20 acres, I would simply add that the land proposed for inclusion in expanded UGB has serviceable water and sewer and is either immediately adjacent to the renewed UGB or its external boundary is no more than 1,360 feet, 1/4 mile from the renewed UGB. In addition, this issue about RHNA percentages, I propose language that would be something like the following.
that the development proposed for the land in question will be either a project proposed by a recognized nonprofit affordable housing corporation or a mixed project combining market rate housing with varied specific percentages on the RENA side that are in the language. Perhaps most importantly, and probably getting ready to conclude, I can't see my timekeeper over here, Wendy. Instead of working with this issue of trying to redefine feasibility, I would simply have us delete the phrase that has made the past 20 years so difficult to act on 5 acres or 6 or 18 or whatever over the years, to delete that there is no existing vacant or undeveloped residentially designated land within the UGB, etc. That particular piece, if we try to talk about feasibility, we're going to get stuck pretty quickly. I think that doesn't offer us anything positive and offers us a big problem. Let's just delete it. Presuming that doesn't trigger CEQA, that's not in my circle of expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Johanna Patry, 621 Napa Road. I just find the language regarding and the concept regarding net acreage dicey. You use words like required setbacks, side yard, backyard, riparian, etc. Well, I don't know, etc. is very subjective. I don't know whether that's to be elaborated on or not. But what about driveways and roadways? And people do live in their backyards. It's my understanding that in the development code allows decks as long as they're not a certain feet high in side yard setbacks. So I think you should stay with the gross of 5 acres. And then my next question is, there's a blank under this provision prior to, it was December 30th, 2020. So are you going to allow 20 acres? I mean, what's the blank represent in your language? There's no date.
We'll respond to questions after public comments done. So we'll take note of that and then we'll move there. You.
Good evening. Mario Castillo, Sonoma Valley resident. I'm also a parent and 3 years living in this valley. I'm actually here to invite you guys to a forum that is happening this coming Wednesday at the Verano School. That might be a good opportunity for you guys to check in and feel, get a feeling of what people are experiencing. We expect teachers, we expect families, we expect residents. Perhaps this might be an opportunity for you guys to also hear. And you know, we expect the working people who live on the other side of town to attend this forum. People that don't typically come to these meetings, but that they do have a concern and they do have an opinion about what goes on. These people may not oftentimes know what the UGB is all about. I'm barely getting educated on it. So I really appreciate this discussion happening. You know, something that also bothers me a little bit, it's the power structure, the powers that have the fights and then the arguments and then the challenges that we find ourselves right now having. And the concern that I have is how those who seem to have the power, which is UGB supporters, how they sort of like want to bully themselves, become bullies, and then really push themselves with this idea that let's just push it as it is, without having really discussions about how that really impact us as a community. Those people who doesn't even understand what the UGB is all about and how that has impacted us for the past 20 years. How that's really impacting teachers, families, firefighters, policemen. I mean, and then really, do I really think that they mean to be bullied because they have the ability and the power to push this through? Because, you know, if they say, well, if you don't approve as it is, we will put it on the ballot and then we will win. That just tells you, you know, how powerful they see themselves, how much power they see themselves having in their hands. That's concerning, because then we're not becoming as a community to really have discussions on the issue. we're not even allowing ourselves to talk about, how this is really impacting us now and looking into the future. And I don't think that we really want to.
Please direct your comments to the council.
I'm so sorry. I really don't think that we want to see. We want to see our. That's the type of community that we want to model for the new generations. So again, I extend the invitation to come and meet the people and hear the people and invite them to walk to the trails and be fair with them, explain to them what the UGB is all about, and then allow people to have that decision, because really that's really what it comes down to. It's people who are not wanted. Infill, people don't want us anywhere near. So where are we gonna go? You want our work. You want us to be here to work, but where are we gonna live? Thank you.
Thank you, Mario.
Hello, Council and Planning Commission. I'm Bill Willers, 873 First Street West. I want to thank the Council and staff for making some progress actually on the language, so that we have something to talk about tonight other than the concept of extending the UGB or extending the timeline for the UGB. I fully support a 20-year extension of the current UGB. And what I'd like to do is go through the actual ordinance so that I can cite different areas directly. And I'm looking at specifically, to begin with, D4, last sentence, where it says this measure allows the city council to bring land into the UGB without public vote for very low and low housing only. To me, that says 100% affordable housing in the very low or low income category. What I would like to add to that is very low, low, and moderate income housing only, so that there is no market rate housing brought into these extended lands. Next, in item or in section 1.5, what was number B but was struck, I guess it'll be number A or letter A. I would put a period after shall control and effectively get rid of all of the setback discussion. I think that is very much a confusing thing, as you have discovered and talked about. It is impossible to decide how much land is going to be actually aggregated to the city under that. How do you set the densities? By removing setbacks? Is the density set by the total parcel area, or is the density set by the net parcel area? I think that this language should be struck from this and just have a period after shall control. It only opens up too many issues. There's no current zoning that does this in the city. We don't remove setbacks from parcel size in the community, and setbacks are actually developed land. It's the land that the houses use, so it's developed land. If we need to deal with the 5-acre issue, we should deal with the 5-acre issue and deal with that directly. The next item would be under the same subsection, and number 2, I would again modify that language so that it says the proposed development will consist of 100% affordable housing, and I would and that affordable housing is for very low, low, and moderate income houses, and I would add a qualifier that it's 80% in the very low income category and 20% moderate. And then in in number 3, I would again strike the added language. I appreciate very much the attempt.
Wrap up. Time's up. Thank you.
That Attorney Walter made, but I think that language needs to be struck.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening. Carol Marcus, 873 First Street West. I think it's really important for us. I've said it before, I've said it in the newspaper, I've written to you, to uncouple the issue of the UGB with affordable housing. It's not the UGB that's to blame for the affordable housing crisis. I really took Mr. Castillo's comments to heart. If by wanting the UGB to remain the same, he's considering me to be a bully against affordable housing or against wanting to incorporate people who work in this community to live here. Nothing could be farther from the truth. I think through our zoning ordinances, through our development code, that's where we need to make very strong changes to make the language clearer so that we get more infill housing and get the kind of housing that we want through our zoning ordinances. It doesn't happen through the UGB. And I would not like to see the language that says 51% affordable housing, because we don't need to expand the UGB to accommodate 49% market rate housing. That's the last thing we need to do. There's plenty of underutilized parcels in the city of Sonoma to accommodate all our RENA numbers, and just by virtue of changing our zoning designations, mixed use, for example, don't call it mixed use anymore. That becomes the new opportunity zone. Raise the density. Commercial zones, don't say, shall have 50% housing unless the Planning Commission decides to waive that. Say it must have that. And thereby we can meet our RENA requirements. To say that we need to push through the edges so that we can accommodate affordable housing is not true. And then in regards to the setback thing, as has been said before, I think it just creates a lot of unclarity to include setbacks, and then what do we do with parking and all of that. That opens up a can of worms that I think creates more problems than it solves. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Tom Conlon, 18850 Robinson Road. First I want to thank staff. This is good work here. I'm glad to see progress moving forward, and all of you for discuss this. I just came from a transportation agency citizens advisory committee meeting and learned a trick that you might want to use for the term of this new measure. We might say something like 20 years and thereafter until amended by a vote of the people. That's being proposed right now for Measure M extension, the sales tax measure on transportation, and it might be something that would be more appropriate, I think, here than in the transportation measure, which has to a little bit more political of a battle, uphill battle. I would avoid the setback language for the reasons already discussed, the CEQA concerns. I support the comments made by many about our affordable housing crisis. I don't think we need to be pushing our poorest people, our most disadvantaged people, to the periphery of our city. We need to keep them close to where the transit is in town. And so I would also support a broader, especially eliminating market rate. We don't have a housing crisis for people who have the money to purchase housing already. And finally, some technical concerns that popped up as I read that new section 1.5. Specifically, as I read the definition of urban development, it struck me that it opens up those parcels that are in the Thornsbury area to any land use. They could be, provided the zoning was feasible, you could build anything out there. As my read of the, is that an unintentional loophole? And then secondly, the contractual agreements section. I know that the new state law requires authorities having jurisdiction to negotiate development agreements. And it concerned me that maybe there could be a situation created where the developer would be asking to negotiate an agreement, and that might be then a loophole to get in to the UGB, especially in that area that you can serve with water. So those are just two kind of weird edge case things to take a closer look at. Thank you for the consideration.
Good evening, Mayor Harvey, Chair Felder, City Council members, Planning Commissioners, staff and members of the public. My name is Terry Shore. I'm the Regional Director for the North Bay for Greenbelt Alliance. First, I would urge the City Council to direct staff tonight to place a 20-year renewal of the urban growth boundary on the ballot for November as proposed by staff. The CEQA issues are complicated, but if you maintain basically the same boundary and the same policies, then you can do it with a mitigated neg deck. You don't need to do a full EIR, as we've seen in all the other cities around Sonoma County. We do appreciate the comprehensive staff report and the draft ordinance that was prepared by staff. It was posted late on Thursday, so we have not had our legal team review it yet, but we will be doing that in the coming weeks. So I'd like to just give you some initial feedback. Renewing the existing City of Sonoma urban growth boundary for at least another 20 years with a ballot measure placed before the voters by the City Council in November 2020 will provide the city and community with flexibility, certainty, and cost savings. Renewing the UGB incentivizes a climate-healthy community with city-centered growth that encourages use of the successful free Sonoma shuttle, biking and walking while protecting open space and ag lands that maintain a green belt that makes us more wildfire safe. We have room to grow within the city of Sonoma, as we've heard tonight. Even if the RENA numbers are doubled or tripled, we can build the housing units that we need. When it comes to the specific language proposed, we agree that any exemptions to the UGB for affordable housing need to be narrowed to 100% affordable housing for low and very low levels. In addition, it doesn't say what's required for the exemption, and we recommend that there's a 4/5 majority vote of the City Council. It doesn't say that, it just says you don't need a public vote, so what do you need? We oppose the proposed acreage exemption because it just adds a lot of confusion and is inconsistent with the general plan and zoning code. We also, I said about the affordable housing. Oh yeah, I also agree that we should strike all that feasibility language. It's really vague and it does not clarify anything in any way, because you could certainly argue ad nauseum about market feasibility, environmental feasibility, and other rules and regulations. So those are our comments. I did submit a 5-page letter with details, and we would be very willing to work on a working group with the staff to tweak the language so we can get something that we all want to work on together.
Terry.
My name is Jack Ding, 859 Plow Street. Good evening, Mayor Harvey, Chairman Felder, and each council member and the commissioners. Thank you so much. Give us this opportunity and express ourselves. And today's major topic, the second half, that's the UGB. Looks like the people are more interested on the affordable housing. Definitely, affordable housing and the UGB, they have relation, but they are definitely against each other. For me, I'm the long time supporting affordable housing, even the homeless housing issue. I have been with the SOS for already the past 7 years. I know that is the housing issue. That's a basic human rights issue. As nobody can avoid this. And also here, I think the UGB, why is it so important? UGB, I want to support, is that is protect us, protecting our small town again. And the people, when people mention about small town and thinking, the different way. But definitely, to be honest, everybody lived here, love to travel here. Why? We like the natural characteristics here. It's beautiful. If it is beautiful, we should protect it. So the UGB is the best way to ensure climate healthy, wildfire, safe, diverse, and affordable communities. That is my point. And also when we mention about the social justice and equity or inequality, these kind of things, and we just mentioned about day-to-day issues, housing issue, and immigrating issue, tax systems, and affordable housing, of course, that is. And one thing, I look at this issue from the historical perspective. For example, Juan. Juan is my younger son's and middle school, right? The middle school, These kind of little kids, they are kids, they're 24 years old, it's not a kid. They also looking for the future. So now our federal government is pulling around other country, borrowing the money, around the country. And also they borrowing the $19 trillion. That means each the US person owe $55,000 for no reason. Who pay back? Right now we are not spending money because government cannot make ends to meet. Who pays that? Juan will pay. And Juan's son and grandson will pay this. So it's not fair. So basically, we should leave this in the UGB as the perfect line to the Juan's generation and Juan's future generations that they make for use of. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.
David Bergode, 240 Del Rio Paseo. Nobody's really arguing with the UGB. It's the affordable housing component. I was working on the habitat proposal for 285 Napa for homeownership housing out there. We looked all over the city. There were no lands available. Hospital lot is gone. The Christmas tree lot is gone. Don't send us to the horse pasture. That's $2.5 million per acre. That's not feasible. I think we should acknowledge that, particularly for affordable housing, where if you're using low-income housing tax credits, you're working with a minimum of 40 to 60 unit projects anyway. We're not going to do this in twosies and foursies and 6 units at a time. I think we have to acknowledge that the land for reasonable, affordable housing production within the city limits of Sonoma is gone. The idea that we put a cap on the number of affordable housing units is crazy. The RENA numbers have been underproduced. The RENA numbers have been underproduced for 5 or 6 cycles. There's a tremendous backlog of underproduction anyway, and the idea that we're going to put a cap on affordable housing is probably something that would be litigated. 80% of AMI, I think we should go up to that level, particularly for home ownership. I want to point out that the county has gone up to 100% of AMI for some of their projects, particularly affordable housing. And somewhere in this, we should commit to the fact that under the housing element of the development code, that if we're going to approve housing, we're going to extend services too. I know the city's got full control over its water. It's got partial control over the sewer. We don't want to find where we're doing a project, we're going to have the rug pulled out from underneath us by denial of a utility extension. And lastly, we have the housing element coming up for renewal in 2 years. We hear that there's potential CEQA liability if we make minor changes to approve affordable housing. I would say let's link the UGB ordinance to the housing element once every 8 years. I don't think we want to see those two get in conflict with each other, which to some degree we already have. Thank you.
Mr. Bergode.
Vic Conforti. And they're passing around some passing around an outline here of my notes. Just in general, I support the existing UGB boundary and the other consistent details with it. My comments start with some general comments, which I'm going to come to last, actually, so I don't run out of time here. So I'm going to go down to the second item there, the existing housing opportunities. And this is all infill housing. I'm just trying to get a handle on the numbers. And under there, the number one, the existing housing element identifies undeveloped lands of kind of two categories. One, which I've lumped together, but the first category is the current within the current city limits, which is what is referred to as Table 2 in the conversation earlier, and the second is additional housing that's in the within the UGB and the SOI, the sphere of influence. These two, and this is taken directly from the housing element, together are 792 units. That approximately 800 units. And then number two, there's another category which has a similar value actually in terms of numbers. There's older development that is mainly commercial development along West Napa Street, a little bit around the bend there on Highway 12 up across from Spain Street. And thank you, Wendy. And those older developments are not going to be there for too much longer. They're not in good condition and will be developed over time sooner than later. Those have a potential for 800 units, and this is just taking their land area and figuring a 20 unit per acre density, which is permitted in those zoning districts. Item 3 is similar to Safeway, where there's existing commercial projects that could be given incentives to create housing over their parking lots or on over a first floor commercial building a second floor with housing. And then the ADUs with the current, or with these new state laws, 30 seconds? Time, okay, all right. Well, you can read the rest of it yourself, but there is a total of about 2,000 units when you include these various things as infill. So there is a significant number that can handle the RENA numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conforti. All right, anybody else rising for public comment? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close it. Thank you so much, Wendy, for timing. Really kept Vic under control there. That was good. All right, so if staff could put back up the kind of discussion points that we were looking for, I think it'd be good to kind of refresh what kind of direction we're looking for from council. We have one on. We have a little note here from you guys about that. No. That's not. Don't look lower. Yeah. Okay. Good. So here's. So we're going to move on to council member and commissioner comments. So again, looking for comments on term, affordable housing acreage exemption, the affordable housing requirements, the feasibility requirements, and the water connections is what we're kind of looking for direction to staff on. So anybody want to jump out? Everybody's excited. We'll go with Commissioner Barbos.
In terms of term, I would support the 20-year that's being proposed. In terms of the acreage exemption, I think that to give us more flexibility, staying with the 20 max, but bumping up the 5, the project that David Brigode spoke about be a case in point. Asking somebody to phase a development where they do 5 acres one year, the rest the next year, could interfere with financing. It's going to delay it. They're going to have carrying costs. Affordable housing is all about getting it done fast. So I think we need more flexibility than the 5 and 20. The low income, the affordable low income housing, I think to me, it's unthinkable that we would go outside the UGB to build a only 51% affordable project. There's plenty of infill possibilities in the city to meet market rate needs. We need to get the kind of financing you're going to need. I mean, I look at that Mid-Penn project in Boy Springs. I happen to really like that project. That required tax credit financing. That was a big project. If we're going to make a dent in providing housing for the people, but provide the backbone of our workforce and our tourist and service economy, we're going to need to provide a lot more housing for them. And I think we need to be able to attract a Mid-Penn or a developer like that can bring in the tax credit financing. We're going to need a little bigger parcels, perhaps. So I think we should try to get that. And I think that the feasibility, I agree with the folks who felt that the feasibility language should just be deleted. We're sort of belaboring a point and giving people who want to challenge a UGB extension, or rather expansion, room to challenge it by saying you haven't shown the feasibility. And we don't need to give them that. We don't need to have that. So those are my thoughts. On the terms of the water connections, I'm fine with what staff is proposing.
Point of clarification, Steve, when you're saying it has to be higher than 51, are you looking for only 100% affordable?
100% affordable is, and I think how it breaks out, 51, 49, sounds good to me, but I mean, that's a decision the council.
And when you say that, you mean very low and low?
Yes.
And then you could go up to what percentage of AMI for the additional 49%?
Yes.
What percentage? Should 120?
Well, I'm thinking
80?
51 very low, 49 low.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Just want to get a point of clarification. Vice Mayor Hunley.
For the term, I support 20 years. For the acreage exemption, I don't support changing it to net because it seems like potentially disincentivize density. I liked the suggestion of taking out the to comply with state law because I think that we need to get rid of away from the RENA requirement. And so as the feasibility thing, I also agree with getting rid of because it does seem like the perfect thing to be challenged for the sake of challenging something. And I just had an idea of, in case like people are worried that we're going to be flooded with so much affordable housing and then we're going to be like, please stop building affordable housing. It could be, just saying, it could be tied to, there being on file a resolution by the city council declaring a housing emergency, something that could change. But I don't think that's going to happen in the next 20 years. So maybe we could just assume that we're going to need housing for the next 20 years and not put that in. I agree about limiting it strictly to affordable housing in the formal sense, and one of the reasons that I am fine keeping the UGB as it is because I like the idea that it gives this competitive advantage to affordable housing developers exclusively to get property outside of the city at a cheaper price and be able to build things on it. And it is true that Habitat project, it literally would never happen inside the city because it is too expensive. It's expensive to do it anywhere, but inside the city limits it is cost prohibitive. As far as the levels of affordability, there's a need at a broad range of affordabilities, even 80% AMI and 100% AMI. And then if you look at other places, the direction we're going, Palo Alto has affordable housing for up to 160 because, and that's, I see us going that way. So it could be that I was thinking of maybe up to 20%, 80% AMI and everything be lower, just to allow for that. It could be that we use other housing tools to fill in that gap, but I know that low, very low is the hardest to build, and it's going to take large projects to actually make it happen. And the question of the number of units, I do think it should be per units, but I want there to be enough protections to, well, I guess if they're all affordable, we don't have to worry about it. But I just want to make sure that it's still going to be an efficient use of space. And like our assumption is that if somebody goes to do a 100% affordable housing project, that it's going to be something that we like, but I just don't want to assume that and have something else there. Because, you know, if I only had 5 acres and I put a house, one house for an affordable house, and you know, then that's not a very good use of land. So maybe the committee can think about that. And then, let's see, I already talked about feasibility, and then the urban development definition I'm fine with. And then the sunset provision, since we're making it 20 years, I think something happened in 20 years, so I wouldn't want to make it in perpetuity, but I'd be interested in seeing what that could look like.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Hundley. We'll go in for Commissioner Barnett Kelso, and then we'll go for Larry after that. We'll go back to back Barnetts.
Thank you, Mayor Harvey. And again, thank you to staff and everybody. I thought this was a great presentation and great work. In terms of term, I support extending it for 20 years. I think the UGB has served us well thus far, and I think moving forward, I think another 20 years at this point is the only thing we can do. I would support a more comprehensive study moving forward as we update the general plan. But, and if the UGB needs to be modified in the future, it can always come back the council can always bring it back to the voters. But in the meantime, I think extending it for 20 years is the best option. And I would be open to some language that Tom Conlon suggested, 20 years or until amended by the vote of the people. In terms of the acreage exemption, I am open to modifying the 5 years and increasing that per year, but I still think the 20-year cap is important. And I do not, as I previously discussed, support the net development acres. I think we need to keep it as gross. I think there would be some CEQA problems with that. In terms of the low-income housing requirement, I also support, as Commissioner Barbo said, if we are going to extend outside the UGB, it has to be 100% affordable housing. And within that, I support low and very low for rental, and I'd be open to moderate for sale. The reason I say that is because there was a project in Sonoma, or recently proposed in Sonoma, that for example, a rental 1-bedroom unit, the units were proposed so small, and the county housing agency determines the price of a 1-bedroom by just the number of rooms, not the size of the project, that you could have market on a price per square foot basis, which is what developers care about, market rate units satisfied under moderate affordable rentals. And so I do think there should be more affordable for sale opportunities, and I'd be open to the moderate, but not for rental. I would also be open to a further discussion on the feasibility requirement, either modifying it, strengthening it, or eliminating it. I'm not sure exactly what I think about that, but I'd like further discussion on that. And and one other point I wanted to say about why I think it needs to be 100% affordable outside the UGB. Vice Mayor Hundley earlier said that, and she's right, that the only place you can really do affordable housing is outside the UGB because of the underlying land cost. But if you can create projects that can be 49% market rate, those land costs outside the UGB are also going to go up as well. And so that's why I think it needs to be 100% affordable. Thank you.
And then we've got Larry next. Here we go.
Thank you. Well, as I think as the only person up here
who was involved in the drafting and implementation and initiative of the urban growth boundary in the year 2000. It's very pleasing to me to see the support for it, and the continuing support for it, and the modifications in general that have been proposed that I find quite pleasing and appropriate. When we drafted the original initiative, it was in the 1990s, as much was, primarily an environmentally oriented document. Our inclusion of provisions for affordable housing as an exemption for the additional land in the UGB was because we could see that the matter of affordability was a looming issue for the city of Sonoma, and we wanted to make sure there was flexibility there. It's terribly ironic, perhaps tragic in a sense, that the proposals for affordable housing have been so few and far between since the city's affordable housing program, funded by redevelopment agencies, has essentially come to an end. And the parcels that have been available within the city that were large enough to accommodate significant projects for affordable housing, basically most of them sat vacant for the last 18 years. This speaks to the market rate housing dynamics. It doesn't speak to the effect of the UGB. If the UGB had been the dominant factor in whether or not affordable housing was built, those parcels would have been developed because they were empty and vacant and sitting there for, as I say, 18 years. So the correlation does not equal causality. One can't point to saying, oh, we had a UGB and therefore there was no affordable housing. That's just a correlation. Yes, we did have a UGB and there has been a dearth of affordable housing, but that does not establish causality. That's just a correlation. Insofar as the changes that I'm seeing in this, I support the term of another 20 years that prevents undue speculation in land outside of the border. I think we need to look at this issue of owner occupied affordable housing projects and come up with some language that can accommodate those. I support the 100% affordable concept. I don't think we should be building any more market rate houses outside of the UGB. I agree in the removal of the setbacks and that language in that entire paragraph that modifies the inclusion or incorporation of additional acreage. Same with the feasibility. I concur with the others who've spoken. I think that just opens up some doors. And I think that the termination or the expiration of this measure should be subject to the same kind of process we're dealing with right here, which is that an extension or a renewal, either brought by the city or by the citizens, is fine. I just want to close by saying that, there are some very large pieces of property still remaining within the city of Sonoma. There's a parcel at the end of Curtin Lane. I think it's owned by the Smith family. At this point, it's now a single-family home surrounded by a very large vineyard. It's one of the few vineyards within the city limits. It's probably at least 10, maybe more acres. There's the property that's to the east of the Chiotti property on Napa Street, which extends back and behind the development that was adjacent to the Ledson development on the east side. That again is another very large property. If you walk the town, which I've been doing a lot of lately for my own health purposes, you get to see a lot of the opportunities that are still around in Sonoma, and there are many. But you can't do it just by looking at a map. You have to get on the ground and walk around and see what's what. And it's a very interesting exercise. I'm happy to walk with any of you if you choose to make a date.
Thank you, Larry. Councilmember Harrington.
Okay, I support a 20-year term For the affordable housing acreage exemption, I think that having more than 5 acres a year is fine, but the total of 20 is good. I would not use the net. I would use the gross. Can somebody just remind me, for affordable housing, what is the period of time that it has to remain affordable? Oh, it's now 55. Okay. So I agree that removing the word feasibility is good. I think they should be 100% affordable. I think the list that Vic Conforti made is actually important, and that I don't think we should have the people that are providing the working class live somewhere separate from everybody else. I think that's not desirable. I think it's much more desirable to live together. I understand that it's difficult to build a very large project, even though we're doing that on Broadway, you know, with the new project. But I think it is undesirable to have poor people living outside of town and wealthy people living inside town. And obviously there'll be de facto discrimination if we do that. And there are a lot of problems with that. So I'm not against building affordable housing, but I think saying that all poor people have to live outside the city limits and other people can live inside the city limits is not great. For the percentages, I really agree. I like the comments about having low and very low B rentals, and I also think it would be great to try and create some for sale opportunities for what we traditionally would consider middle class people who now can't afford to raise a family here or even live here near their work. So I would support that. What those actual numbers are, I'm open to discussion about that, what that means. But I think that would be excellent, and we should encourage that. And I don't have a comment about item 5, the definition of urban development. And I would say that I think that this is a very, it has become a very contentious issue by very passionate people. And I think tonight the discussion was super respectful and informative. And thank you to everybody for all of your comments, because I think they were really well thought out and informative. So.
Yeah, let's go Councilmember Agramonte, and then we'll go to Rodwell.
Thank you. I also like your presentation here, Vic, because much of it is, really understandable. The only thing I find hard to even look at is the 800 units. And I walk Sonoma also. Everything you look at, somebody's going to appeal. Forget it. I'm sorry. I don't know how you get people to stop appealing. Maybe raise that amount to $5,000 per appeal. I don't know. Pardon? Okay, $5,000 per appeal. Because I'm telling you, those 800 units, I don't know what percentage is going to be appealed. We spend thousands of dollars fighting appeals on some of these projects. So, I don't give it that much weight. 20 years is fine. From what I can see, the 5, I think it's the 5. 20 years is okay. I know it was being pushed around for a while, 30 years, but it seems like 20 seems to be this average thought. I like the 5 plus for number 2, and with a maximum cap of 20 years. The 3, I think, I really like the idea of home ownership. There's nothing better than a young person or even a senior being able to buy their own home. That's the American dream. I believe in that. And I would like that to be 100%, some type of a modification for that. I'm no on the feasibility study. And 5 was affordable housing. I don't understand that one. I'm sorry. Yeah, right? I've read so much, but guess what? My iPad went dead. And, but I have to tell people, look at the numbers that are being spent on appeals here. Forget about Sonoma. You're not going to build here. I want to. I'll fight. I'll go fight if you want that. But I'm telling you, it's not working. I'm kind of, I guess I'm concerned about the UGB, and I'm concerned about this little thing that's going on. And as Amy said, people were very respectful of each other. But it's like two good things. You don't want them to be against each other. They're really good things. And so the urban growth boundary, I understand that. And poor people living outside of the city, what about good transportation? That would not be the issue. I wouldn't mind living out there if you could just give me a bus that would get me here to work on time, or get me to Santa Rosa, or get me down to Marin, and just 2 buses go down and come back. All right, that's it. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome. We'll move on to Vice Chair Runwell. I will not repeat, but for the most part, I do support the majority of the comments that have been shared. Regarding the term, the 20 years makes sense, but I would like to add, if possible, the ability, and I won't be certainly in this position in 20 years, but I think that we've precluded the opportunity to give at least thoughtful consideration to a change of the UGB, because we backed ourselves up time-wise. So even if we had something legitimate, we can't do it. So I would like to just add that there be a footnote in year 18 or something like that that suggests that there at least should be a discussion. So that's regarding that. In terms of, I do not think we should exceed the 20 acres in the term. I do support flexibility with that 5 acre, because I would not want to see that Burbank housing project being precluded, because I think again, it's warranted when you can cap out at the 20 acres. And lastly, I do support also the housing and the mix, low, very low, but I also support the idea of ownership. I also like the idea of having a mix of affordable housing within a complex. So the 80% AMI in some fashion, some percentage, because I'll go back to my earlier statement in the first part, and that is, I think there's a value and a richness in diversity. And when you start developing all of one, then it tends to be a little bit more homogeneous. Those are my comments.
It's nice to go towards the end and you can just say I agree with everything that's been said, but I certainly agree with my vice chair. I think he summed it up very well, and I think there's a general consensus up here. Just really move forward on this thing and get it. I think we've got enough to go ahead, and I should.
Okay. And Councilmember Barnett, Councilor, do you have a comment? Are you okay? Oh, Sheila, sorry, I apologize, I missed her.
I don't have a whole lot to add here because I'm in agreement with most of it. I do have one point of clarification, that if there is the need in the future for communities to decide to want to be annexed, that's something that we're not stopping them from doing. It's separate from the UGB. There were some comments related to the Springs. I think that that's not the UGB issue, so we need to keep that separate. I understand your frustration with appeals, Councilmember Agramonte, but I think that they are part of the democratic process. And okay. But in regards to, I think getting the message out clearly for this election, November 2020, is critical. So I think the fewer changes that we make to make sure that this message gets out very clearly during this very busy election period, that we will be serving ourselves well, and it does not stop us from making changes in the future.
We have comments from Commissioner Bohar here.
Well, I sense an intelligent consensus here, so I'm not going to be anything but concise, but I would certainly go with the, as proposed by Councilmember Harrington. I think sort of summed it up all for me. So I'm comfortable with the direction we're going in.
Okay. Anybody else from the board like to speak? So I'll just make my comments as well.
Yeah, so I broadly agree with what's been said here. I think we were hearing, broad agreement for 20 years. We're hearing broad agreement for adding some flexibility to bring in a little more acreage so that we don't have to truncate projects. Some more flexibility there. Broad agreement on 100% for rent. I think the comment that really kind of solidifies that those developments for low income, it keeps the prices low, I think is important. I would really like to see some flexibility for home ownership on that level. So, I mean, I would be willing to go up to 120 or at least 80. I would be willing to put 80 in the for rent category too, if a certain percentage wanted to be there. I understand really the funding for affordable housing development, you have to be at very low and low income, but kind of looking at the way that our housing is developing in Sonoma, unless we make changes to our inclusionary ordinance to require that 80% level, I don't know where that's going to come from because developers broadly haven't been building it. So including some flexibility outside the UGB may be a way to kind of create that. I do think that we should be bringing in, or at least talking to, an affordable housing developer or a low income developer as we go through this process. And I think that would be a worthwhile thing to kind of include if we're going to develop some sort of ad hoc committee. As far as comments for future UGBs, I would like to see the council kind of discuss, setting regular money aside so that the next time in 20 years we have money. If we start that process now, it may not be that encumbering to do it, so that we have that money available when we come up to the next UGB in case we want to go out. And so I think adding some language there would be good, that, we're going to start this process earlier so our backs aren't against the wall. I also think on the comment about, what happens when this UGB expires, I agree with Commissioner Barnett, Larry, that we should kind of go back and do this process again. I don't agree with the in perpetuity UGB there. So I think we've got broad direction from Commission and Council here. Do you guys have any clarifying questions or anything? Okay, great. Sounds like we're done. All right, very good. Oh, Kathy wants to talk. Hold on, it's not actually done.
It's all right. So we'll come back at the February 3rd meeting and have a conversation with council about appointments to an ad hoc for the UGB and appointments to ad hoc for the development code, and then how we'll structure that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Excellent job. Take care.
Neighbors.